school or college. But I'm going to take a safety precaution first, which is also going to be fun for all of you. I haven't been informed by some people that there's some dark forces of somebody that does not like what I'm saying. So to be safe, I suspect that it's possibly some dark alien forces that are after us or something, or do not like what they're doing. So if there are any of you in here, it's time to go. Because I have an ancient Egyptian cleansing ritual that whatever they try to do to us or this room while we're speaking, it's going right back to them.
And it's true.
It's an ancient Egyptian ritual that sends it, that whatever they're trying to do, it will go back to them. Any negative energy is going to be reversed and we're going to be free. I would like you to repeat after me each line. And when I raise my hand on the last line, look up to the sky, and that should do it. Awa ubena emnen.
Awa ubena emnen.
Keferu kua. Em keferu en keferem. Keferem septepi.
Keferem septepi.
Shetu.
Shetu.
Satutka en herak.
Satutka en herak.
Thank you. We're safe now. Now we can begin.
That was an ancient Egyptian prayer that cleansed them of Shetu. Grays, yeah. It's probably about 5,000 or 6,000 years old.
I had to look it up before this lecture to get it in.
Okay.
Okay. We may now begin.
I'll see you. Okay. Okay, a while back when I started this, I was collecting ancient coins, and we got into commercial artifacts because many companies that deal in ancient coins, they feature other articles of antiquity. And I was going to write a book called Who Stole the Lamp? Now, if you're a coin collector, you have to travel to different places and to see the coins that you want to see. If there's a certain particular coin that you want to buy, you try to track it down and you try to get a good deal on it. And you see a bunch of other stuff too. And you meet people from Assyria, people from Iraq, people from Iran, people from Egypt, people from Greece, people from Kentucky, people from Indiana, people from New York City, all over the states that are at major coin shows around the United States that have their artifacts, that have their coins for sale. And the first portion of this presentation is going to be, who stole the lamp? Now, in many modern contemporary artifacts, what they suppose artifacts as genuine, authentic, artifacts of sorts, they feature these little oil lamps. They used to be $20, then they got up to $35, then they're $45, now they're $50, $60, $100, now they're $200. Every company features them in all their catalogs all the time. There's just endless. And I have examined literally hundreds of these. None of them have any oil residue. None of them have any carbon burn marks on them. But everybody swears that they are all authentic. So the name of my book, which is the first part of this, Who Stole the Lamp? So the only way that, as Paul and I do our research, things have to make sense. We can't just pull something out of the air and say, okay, this is what this means, or this is how this happened. There has to be a logical, definitive reason for why things happen in the sequential order that they do. And after examining literally hundreds, thousands of these, because let alone all of these warehouses like the Sadi Gallery out of New York City, who sell these things, and so many others, Amphora, the Helios Group, the Cleaton Group, the Tomlinson, all these coin companies that are now selling these ancient lamps, supposed ancient lamps. Who stole the lamp? The only conclusion that I could come to is that somebody 2,000, 2,500 years ago went through a town and snuck in everybody's house, stole their lamp because all of them are in perfect condition, stole their lamp, and then went to Judea, Palestine, Israel, and dug a hole and put them all in there and gently packed them all into this one hole because they find them in, large quantities in certain holes, and they dig them up, and they sell them to Americans. You can call up this company here, and you can order 25 of this style. You can order 30 of this style. They have so many styles, and they each have their own little name. Each of them, they know exactly what city they come from, what year they were made, and what era that was from. Go ahead, ma'am. And it's that, like I say, none of them have any carbon residue. None of them have any oil in them, and they don't show anything. And these are two that just came out last week, and I wanted to bring them to show you that they are the most recent. And now they're making them real fancy. Some of them you can double as a pipe. Some of them you can do this, and they're $100, $225, $150, $150, $250, $125, $100, $100, $100, $100. So there's big money in this. Extra fine condition. None of them are broken. I have been to these artifact shows, and the people that I have seen what they call Roman makeup bottles, that the glass is thinner than a light bulb. And it's got mud caked up all around it. And they'll have 20, 30, 40 of them up here. Well, how in the world is somebody going, what are the chances of somebody finding these really fine makeup, and they got the mascara stick to go with it. Oh, this is what they did, was they put mascara in there, but they said it was tar. Can you imagine, ladies, having tar on your eyes when you cried or something and you sweat and you having tar come down your face? So, and you put they just happen to have the little curve in the mascara liner, and you stick it down in there, it fits just perfect. And the glass is super thin, it's paper thin, but they'll have mud caked up all around it to make it look like it's old, like somebody dug it up. And some of them are very finely painted around the edges, and it's obviously that it's blown glass. And so who stole the lamp? And now we're going to get to who stole the lamp. I collect currencies. Now we're going to leave ancient coins for just that, and the lamps. I collect currencies. And in this book, there's more currencies than there are in the Smithsonian. When I was in the Smithsonian, I'd heard, oh, how great and wonderful the Smithsonian was, and how it's got all these buildings, and oh, you can just get lost in there for days. I saw everything I wanted to see in the Smithsonian in less than 2.5 hours. They didn't have really a whole lot of anything. I had more maps than they had, better maps, better condition. We had a lot more currencies than they had. And it's a couple of very funny things with the currency. We'll notice that the first currencies in the United States were actually the southern banks of the Confederacy. They supported, you had a bank, and the bank would set up its money with what its wealth was of the community. And they tried different schemes. They would print different monies. And a bank is fine as long as everyone in the community honors that particular denomination of monetary exchange. There's absolutely no problem whatsoever. It was fine. The farmers were happy. The traders were happy. The business people were happy. Everyone was happy. The first actual United States or United Colony currency, what you see is this type of this. It looks like this. They're all backed by the Spanish shilling. And the reason for that is because the United States was supposedly attempting to get away from the financial burden of England. So they shifted the money from an England backing, or the British note, the British pound, into something that was backed by Spanish shilling. I'm sure that made everybody feel very wonderful. And as time grows on, as the 1800s come about, the southern banks are doing fine during the Confederacy, but the Union's got it, the federal banks have got to catch up. So they come up with the first dollar bill in 1862 during the height of the uncivil war. War is not a civil thing. It's either glorious or not. You either win or lose. But they started printing money, federal money. And a funny thing, about the same time that federal bills started coming out, currency all over the world came about on the scene, just that fast. The same denominations. Some of them had the same characters on them. They had the same style. They had the same circular objects in them. They had the same coloring. They had the same, I've got several of them in here, but it's too lengthy here to go through them. But all of these countries that are this big, that obviously had no printing press, they hardly had anybody that even knew how to speak their own language. They printed up the money, and it all comes about on the scene at the same time. Money in North America was backed by coinage, mostly, up to this point. But around about 1820, 1830 or so, just about every country in the world, all of a sudden, has coinage. The same denomination, in many cases, the same guy's head. In the British Empire, all these countries had their own coinage with the King George III on them. And they all came about at the same time. With the same denomination. A quarter was exactly the same size. The pennies were exactly the same size. The deca coins or the dime, what we would represent 10 of something, were all the same size. The nickels were the same size. The gold coins were all the same size. So it's obvious, it became obvious to me that whoever was doing it, it was the same person printing up all of it. It was the same person stamping out the coinage. It was the same persons that were printing all of the bills that were spread out all over the world, and it all happened just like that. Well, around about the 1800s, we get a new thing going. It's called postage. And oh, isn't that great? We had the Pony Express, then we had the Postal Service, which now is just we buy little bitty pieces of paper with some print on them that is a coupon for 32 cents. You don't even have to lick them anymore. Now they put the stick on it for you. You're getting your money's worth. You stick it on a letter, you drop it in the mail, and it goes somewhere. Well, I collect stamps too, not because I think it is a financial gain or it's going to make me. I just collect this stuff to learn from it. And I collected world stamps for a long time, and I had a series of stamps, big, thick, old books that was passed down to me from my grandfather, a couple of my uncles, my father, that said, oh, well, here, we got a sucker that's going to spend all this time with all these stamps. Let's just give it all him. If you got anybody in your family that collects stamps, if they even think that you're slightly interested, they'll just give you everything. So I had all these stamps and all these boxes, and I went and started going through the big albums that I had that were very old also, and putting everything in them. And I noticed some very strange things. Stamps were the same way. All of a sudden, they all appeared on the scene just like that. They had the same styles, the same denominations, many of them the same heads. There was an Argentinian stamp back in the early 1930s that had Roosevelt's head on it. Now, why in the world would the Argentinians have a Roosevelt head on their stamp? There were triangle stamps, there were octagonal stamps, and they had for different countries. They were all written the same way. Some of them were the same country, the same color. And out of all this, oh, wait a second now. What are the chances of this happening in the real world? What's behind all this? And with the stamps, I noticed in doing it that there were some very small countries that had a series of 50 or 60 stamps. And they had page after page in these books. And you go and you look for these countries. I'd never heard of them. And countries have changed names in this century 10 or 15 times. And there was some small Tibetan emirates. There was a tiny Tibetan emirate that was way up in the Himalayas that had 100% illiteracy. It was kind of like between the border of Mongolia, China / Russia, and they had absolutely no literacy. They had a language that they could speak, which was some off-the-wall dialect of Russian twisted into Chinese and whatnot. And I had a series of 30 stamps from this country, and everybody's illiterate. Well, who's writing letters to who? Who's paying bills? Is there a power company there? Was there a railroad? Was there postage? Yes, there was. But nobody could write letters. And it was obvious that all of these stamps, when you examined them, they all had exactly the same dimensions. I got down with a microscope and measured them all. And series, let's say that you have a certain series of stamps from the United States in 1935, just to give you as a hypothetical situation that I came across. You'd have a stamp that would be put and printed a certain color, a certain denomination with a certain number of little ridges on the stamps. Now, that's really important on stamps when you're a stamp collector. It's got to have exactly the right number of little squiggles on it. So when you tear it, you know, those little things that hold it together, perforations. When you tear it, and they give you all these gauges to measure it by, all of them were identical. The world over. Come to find out, they were all printed in Philadelphia. Every doggone one of them. All the countries except for England, with all their stamps were printed in Philadelphia. Well, I got to thinking and said, well, let's look at this a little closer. And sure enough, all of the money, except for England and Germany, was printed in Philadelphia. Germany, because they were the ones making the presses for us to print our money. All of them came from the same place. This Saddam Hussein note was one of the most popular bills in Iraq during the Iraqi War, the Gulf War. While the Gulf War was going on, and we were feeding the flocks with cannon fodder, this bill was being stamped in Philadelphia right next door to where your monies was being stamped at. Right next door to it. Was there a disruption in the flow of cash? No. Did they tell you about it? No. Did you read about it in National Enquirer? No. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that all the money is printed in the same place, except for England and Germany. And I think France now prints a couple of their own bills. Well, there are other forms of currency. We have the United States Postal Money Order. It's as good as gold. And I got into looking at this one day, and I was, you know, I collect currencies, and I said, well, what are some other things that I can collect that have to do with monetary exchange or international monetary exchange? And you know, let me look at this postal money order a little closer. And when I did, I noticed some very peculiar things that no one in the postal community knew. And those guys, you ever get to the post office, man, they're like, they don't care if you're in a hurry at all. They get off at 5. And they're extremely lackadaisical. Not to knock anyone in the post. I think it's a dogma. I think they give you on the test, can you be slow enough to wait on customers? So, but I noticed something. When you take this thing and you hold it up to the light, it has what is known as a watermark. And any of you guys can come up here and look at this later. Say, man, that guy doesn't look like anybody I know. Who is that? Is that Benjamin Franklin? No. George Washington? No. Thomas Jefferson? No. Come to find out, guess who's on the United States Postal Money Order? Adam Weishaupt. All right, now, so this particular one here comes from, it's dated December the 7th, 1992. Pardon me? Adam Weishaupt was one of the initiators of the Illuminati in the late 1700s. He was the granddaddy. He was big-time Mason. He was big-time into government. The German, the European, just big into government. He was the father of modern-day Illuminati. You can the best information you can find on him is in the Freemasonry Encyclopedia, which is really good for information like this. So what happens is, I'm catching on. I'm going to the post office. I'm showing, hey, did you see Adam Weishaupt on your postal money order? Oh, who's Adam Weishaupt? All right. Hey, Jed, did you ever see that? There's a man there. Cool, I never saw that before. Did you see that? So they would start talking among themselves and showing each other these postal money orders. And obviously, they never looked at them. Postal masters never even knew about it. Well, along towards the end of 1993, they changed it a little bit. They changed the money order, the United States Postal Money Order. They put a little fictitious circle here, but they don't put the guy's face in it. You hold it up to the light, and sure enough, there he is. There he is. And what the lore is behind this, is my opinion, and you know, and I've tried it with some other people, is when you see the image here, that's when we got big trouble. When they bring Adam Weishaupt's picture in on your postal money order, people may ask questions, they may not. But they're preparing your U.S. postal money orders for it. And this is one thing that I wanted to show you and share with you. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about, I call it pass the hat. I've been collecting ancient coins for years. I got the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, Ptolemy's, had all these, Antiochus, Demetrius, you name it. I got Darius coins, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, King Cyrus, everybody's coins here, silver. I got some gold coins, but I don't travel with them. That's what we are. We're pretty much a traveling museum. And there's a lot of things to be, fun things to learn from all this. Then we have the Roman Republic, Julius Caesar coins, Mark Antony. And then we have the Roman Empire, all these Neros, all these Roman Empire coins of the Roman emperors. Funny thing, they all got on the same hat. Now, 98%, if you study, how many people study Roman history? Good, don't bore yourself. Leave it to bookworms like us to tell you what happened. What happens is that 98% of all the Roman emperors were killed by their successor. Either poisoned or had their throat cut, or, you know, a good one was if you were a son, you killed your dad. Then you were really cool. Can you imagine after you killed the guy, stealing his hat and putting it on your head? That's my hat now. Well, funny thing also, none, absolutely none of the museums have any of these hats. There are no Roman or Byzantine edifices, or Mediterranean edifices that have that show these hats in any perspective. There are no inscriptions that talk about these hats. There is no ancient author that correlates anything with these strange spiked hats that look real cheap. I mean, you know, some of them have a laurel band, and some of them just, you know, just the spikes. And, you know, it's like, okay, what do we got here? We study Roman history like no one you have ever met before. Paul and I put down books like they're bags of potato chips. And nowhere in any of them did it say, or is there anything described, or any mural, any ancient painting, anywhere in the world that shows these metallic spiked hats. Some of the emperors have themselves, now I'm not over-exaggerating, they have their head facing left, and they're like this. You didn't have, I'll get you for that. That'll be the one that makes it to the newspaper, I bet you. We found them like that. I found them like that. I found them with eyes like this. I found out if you're a Roman emperor, you know, how in the world would you tolerate somebody putting something so grotesque on your coin? Come to find out, there's several of them that are like that. I mean, you can go back through your ancient coin books at any time. A lot of libraries have them. They're real thick now. Back in the 1920s and 30s, they were thin. Then in the early 40s, they get a little bit thicker. Late 40s, they get a little thicker. In the 50s, well, by 1965, you can buy an ancient coin book that thick. Well, what happened? All these coins that of these emperors with their funny expressions in their faces, they're all in mint condition. They don't show any pocket wear. They don't show, and I've got all these magazines, all these catalogs. Trust me, ladies and gentlemen, we have more Roman coins in the United States today than they ever saw in ancient Rome. There's supposedly 15 ancient mints, but none of the ancient writers talk about really specifically, except for like the mint at Antioch, the one at Alexandria, the one in there was one in Judea, just outside north of Judea. You know, there's a couple here and there. And a lot of the coins, like Paul's saying, is they must have handled them by the side because the edges are wore out. But the thing on it, so this is what they'd have to do. Hey, can you loan me a quarter? Oh, cool.
Don't touch.
Thank you. Thank you. And the edges are all cut. Well, funny thing, I found the same cut on my Commodus, identical under the microscope as the Hadrian. It's about, what, 50, 60 years difference there. You know, why is the Hadrian got the same exact crack as the Commodus? And they got the same hat naturally, and they got the same expression. Another funny thing. These Julius Caesar coins say Julius Caesar on them. They say Caesar in English. A C-A-E-S-R. He was known as Yola Caesar or Ioa Caesar in northern Numidian. He was never called Julius Caesar. Hey, Julius! The letter J didn't even come into our language until 1775. They always used an I. And if you're thinking, well, what did they use for the J sound? They always used the DG. That's how come you have words like bridge, judge. You know, they used the DG combination, a soft G, to indicate what a J sound. Josephine. It would be Josephine. Yeah, no, but just because it's got a J in your book printed in 1990 doesn't mean that's what she was mentioning about the name Josephine.
Was the early 1800s?
Yeah, well, see, that was already after the letter J was in the English language and other places too. This was mostly for now. This particular Julius Caesar coin is a very famous Julius Caesar coin. Everybody wants one, me included, because it says Caesar on it. Now I got to use Paul as a witness here. As you know, you want to. I would drag him along to the coin shows. He wouldn't want to go, and I'd say, "Come on, let's go." We met an Assyrian coin dealer that goes back and forth. His name is Moffat, but he says, "Call me Murphy." Murphy. He wanted to have an Irish name so bad. He wanted to be American so bad. Murphy. And I told him, I said, well, you know, at one coin show, I can't remember which one it was, I said, man, I'd like to have one of those Julius Caesar elephant heads, you know, I mean, I really would. And what did he say?
I have none right now, but I'm going back to Syria in 2 weeks, and I promise I will bring you back a Julius Caesar coin. I know exactly where to find one.
I will dig you one up.
I will dig you one up.
I will dig you. I know where to dig for Julius Caesar coin. I dig you one up.
I know the mountain and the hill where the coins are.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right. So, okay. So, what happens is, I see him at the biggest people in coin, that collect coins are called numismatists. I'm a numismatist. Like, man, why couldn't they have made, why couldn't they make it something simple to say? A numismatist. Well, I was at a numismatist show in Orlando. It was called the World Numismatist Society show. And I'm walking along. Hey, Harry, come here. I have for you your coin. He goes, I saved this for you. I have these for you. And then, no, sure enough, he had my dadgum Caesar coin. Extra fine condition. Extra fine condition. I tell you, I know where to dig. Paul was there when I bought it too. I tell you, I find you one. I tell you, I know where to dig. Huh? So, and he was one. I really like Moffat. He's all right. I bought coins from him, and through the years, and some of the other Assyrians and Iraqis and stuff that came. You want to buy ancient Iraqi coins, just see an Iraqi that deals in coins. They got it all. They got whatever you could, place your order, and 6 months later at a coin show, pick it up. And they don't even charge you freight. So that's just such a good deal. Some of these other coin companies that I'm fixing to talk about, they charge you freight. Well, another funny thing. Out of all these catalogs of ancient coins, none of them match. These guys have a new series every issue. These guys have different coins every issue. They're all extra fine. They got all these different Alexander heads. Well, Alexander, there must be over 200 Alexander coins. That's just in silver, let alone the gold. Paul and I saw a huge gold Alexander in pristine. You could count the whiskers on his face. A gold coin, a little bit less than an ounce. They wanted $10,000 for it. So there's money to be made. And it was like a proof. A proof is supposedly stamped twice and then polished. And it was as pristine as any proof I'd ever seen. Any ancient eagle, anything like that. And then I'm sitting there looking, let me tell you about this one particular coin show, though, going on to some of the other stuff. Well, first of all, these coins that are in these books, they don't even match the ones that are in the big thick books. They don't even match those. So it's like, why don't these guys get together and decide what they're going to do for coins? Today, this is one that came in last week. It's really outrageous. They have written on the coin, cold beer. K-O-L-B-E-R, cold beer. Now, that's in none of these other catalogs. How did he just happen to find some cold beer coins? It's in none of the other diaries. It's in none of the other coin books. It's in none of that. And when we were at the coin show in Orlando, you get to, there's a big Dr. So-and-so from Lexington, Kentucky. He's at all the shows. Dr. Crisp, the world's greatest in the United States numismatist. His name is Dr. Saslow. The incredible Dr. Saslow. He dresses up in a Roman huchika with big Roman corons and got the shield, and he struts around there, you know, looking like a Roman. He's the one that had the big Alexander head. And oh man, he's like recognized as the world's greatest wacko numismatist. And one of his buddies, Dr. Crisp or whatever his name, they had a pile in his case there of pure silver Athenian coins. And they wanted $350 a piece for them. And they were all just piled up. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, if you got a coin that's worth $350, you have it in a little case. You at least have it in paper. You know? You have it in some kind of thing. But these were just all piled up together. And when I asked to see one, he just pulls one out and they fall over. And it's like he no regard for, well, does he know something I didn't? Well, obviously, you know, those particular coins were a bad batch because they cooled too quick, and the outside of them frothed. So, you know, me and Paul are putting all this together, and there's one Sunday morning, me and Paul, we stay up all night studying stuff like this for some reason. We go back to the Society gallery. I said, man, I'll bet you that I could call these guys and order. They had a set. A pendant earring set. Had a gold Alexander coin in extra fine condition on a brooch. And it had a Ptolemy earring for the left ear and a Ptolemy earring in silver, extra fine condition for the right. 2 earrings. So I said, man, I bet you that I could go up, call these guys, and order just as many of them as I wanted. And sure enough, I called them up. I said, yes, I'm here with the Southern Baptist Church, and we wanted to get something nice for our ladies teachers on Sunday morning, our teachers group. And I just wondered how many of these sets of the medallions and the earrings can I get? It goes, well, how many do you need? How many do you need? This gallery's in New York City. I said, hey, Reverend Paul, how many of them things do we need? And he goes, oh, we need 80 or 100 or something, 85, something. We just picked out a number. And he goes, oh, no problem, man, I can have them to you in 4 days. I said, well, are they all going to be extra fine just like these? Oh, yeah, or better, or better, or better. But what they got is they got a big bin back there with a shovel. They throw them in the machine, and they wrap them up. Look at how many they have now. They have increased their stock so many times over. You can get them situated in a laurel leaf, in a chain. You got them facing left, facing right. You got them in different. There must be 30 different Alexander coins, and I know my stuff that I've never seen before. She's getting it. Whoever's back there, you're starting to get the hang of this. I like that. I can see those gears starting to. On the other page, they even got rings now that'll match your earrings and your brooch. You can go in and say, yeah, you see this? I got this Alexander coin from the Society gallery. I paid $125. Here's one for $395. 325 BC. They have cufflinks. They have tie clasps. Extra fine condition. And don't forget that we don't forget the ladies. We have all these wonderful ladies. Boy, here's 3 Alexander heads in silver hanging on the same ear. Pardon me, sir? Nose rings or? No, these are earrings. If somebody has a question, just, you know, this might be a little heavy. Just go ahead and ask.
What you're trying to say is that they're all counterfeit.
What did you say? I ordered from one of these companies. I think I found his book here. M&R Stamps and Coins. He's another one too. He's got all these Alexander heads. They know exactly where they were minted, when they were minted, everything else. And Paul said, let's start really getting esoteric with these guys. Let's hit the emperors that were just there for a couple of weeks before they were assassinated. So one of the first ones I said, I just went through the book, Trebonius. So I ordered a Trebonius coin for 35 bucks or something. He comes back, he ships it to me, and they ship them in little cardboard. They don't put their return address because they don't want you to know it's coins. Oh, we've had stuff getting stolen in the mail because they could see it's a coin company. Well, that Trebonius coin was stamped out of aluminum. And this guy had the audacity. I told him, I said, yeah, I bought that Trebonius. I kind of wish I had kept it, but I was so ticked off about it. We broke off a piece of it, held it up in tweezers, lit a match to it, and he goes, whew. And it was purely, you could tell by the feel of it, it was light as it sounded worse than a penny or a dime. I mean, it was obvious that it was fake, and I sent it back to get another fake one, okay? What we found out, what we discovered is that they had emperors that only ruled for like 2 weeks. They had an entire series of coins minted at all 15 places. And the guy didn't even get the throne warm with his fanny. And he was gone by the next guy. There is the year that had 3 emperors, 3 Roman emperors. They call it the year of the 3. It had Galba, Ortho, and Vitellius. And all 3 of them have these massive, you can just pick out what you want. Gold, silver, or bronze, and the entire denomination. Minted at Antioch, minted in Rome, minted in Alexandria. It didn't matter. They got them all. And so what happens is with all this, people, got their eyes shut while all this is going on. I'm sure that none of you ever dreamed that you'd come here to Global to hear some history buffs and numismatists speak about ancient coins. But what they did was this. They started attempting to back up history with ancient coins. Now, you can go and you can buy Bar Kokhba coins. How many of you are familiar with the Bar Kokhba wars? Good. One lady, okay? Bar Kokhba was supposedly a Jewish renegade, and he's not recorded by any classical writer, but we have the coins that prove it. He comes on the scene about the mid-late 1800s with this fictitious story about he saved the day, how he did this. Look, these coins back it up. And all the coins are written in block Hebrew script with an English syntax. Well, some of them have a Latin syntax. Hebrew coin has a Latin syntax. And before World War II, there was a German book printed that was just very nonchalant. Said, man, we don't have any proof whatsoever that Pontius Pilate ever lived other than what's in the Bible. Not so anymore. Behold, in all these magazines, all these books, we got Pontius Pilate's in mint condition out the yang-yang. We've got Herod the Great. We've got Agrippa. We've got them all. We know exactly where they were minted. We know everything. Where are they at here? They're everywhere now. We got Pontius Pilate. And another one is the widow's mite. The story, the parable in the Bible talks about the widow's mite. Well, now you can buy 50, 100, 200, 300, as many as you want. And you can get them, if you want to pay a lot of money, you can get them in excellent, fine, extremely fine condition. Or you can get the medium grade, what they call, what they call very fine or very good, and then you get good. And it's, what are the chances of us having today any ancient coins? Now let's put it in our perspective today. Think of how many pennies are out there today. How many times do you think somebody will find in 2,000 years from now a stash of pennies? A few years ago, actually about 3 years ago in London, England, a priest was hammering on a window. He dropped on the old monastery there. He was hammering on, I'm not making this up. I forget what the stash is called. Hammering on a window pane, putting in nails. He dropped the hammer. Well, instead of going out and around the cathedral, he just climbed out the window there and found, picked a hammer up and noticed a little gold coin there. Well, it just so happens that he found a stash of ancient coins of 3 Byzantine emperors. That's 4,000 miles away. Gold coins, all of them in extremely fine condition, and they were all an exact number. There was 100 of one, 50 of another, 60 of one, 120 of the other, 200 of this other one. And they were all perfect. Nothing half. No 61 of something. They were all exact numbers. And what they've tried to do is create an enigma with these ancient coins that proves particular points in history that the history books today are trying to tell us. Through my studies of ancient history and Roman history, there are 3 primary ancient historians that do not cut the mustard. And they are Philo, Eusebius, and some of you may know this person, Josephus. Josephus is supposedly a historian that chronicles the antiquities of the Jews. He does all this stuff, and it just matches the English King James Bible word for word. The only part he gets right in his history is what's in the King James Bible. The rest of what he says in history is just absolute mistakes. If you look in the Encyclopedia Judaica under Josephus, they will tell you that he was a bogus historian of about 1000 AD, that they took his work, added a bunch to it, stamped it with Josephus, and they started printing them in the late 1500s. He supposedly knew Aramaic and Greek. Well, in the front of every Josephus book, you can open it up, and you will see that the picture of Josephus on the front is identical to John Calvin of Geneva, Switzerland. It's the same guy, but he's got a different hat. Eusebius, I would just want to point out, is a lot of Eusebius is okay. But Eusebius will be going on describing something, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he'll start backing up Philo. Philo this, Philo. And ladies and gentlemen, I beg you to understand that these guys have been tainted. They are a catch-all. As much of everything that they have wrong with history, they prove certain aspects of what people are trying to say today in contemporary times of what ancient history was to depict. So who created all these ancient coins? And where did they come from? What are the chances of all of these Alexander heads, these gold coins, these silver coins, making it across the Great Lake, the Atlantic Ocean, in an airplane without somebody stealing them? It's like transporting diamonds or something. These guys make a lot of money. These things aren't cheap. But you see, there's not a single one in here has any wear on it whatsoever. And they prove ancient history with it. You can go through 400 years of ancient Roman emperors that all have the same hat, identical from start to finish. And it is my opinion that what has happened is that if these coins were real, what somebody did was they either went back in time and got the dies, or they managed to hold on to the dies, sequester them, conceal them for 2,000 years later. These coins did not exist in the 1800s. There are no books printed in the 1800s that show these ancient coins. When you find an ancient coin in Europe, what does it look like, Paul?
I've done some archaeological work in Europe, and I have found some ancient Roman coins after we were digging, but they were extremely corroded where you couldn't see anything.
You can hardly even make out 1 or 2 letters, much less Pius Antonius, the great conqueror, the benevolent one who builds houses. You know, they've got all these inscriptions. They got cold beer on them. They got an ancient coin now that they're printing cold beer on. That's, I guess, to get to the mental psyche of Falstaff lovers. They got, and there's also one that has U.S. on it. Right dead in the center of the laurel leaves. It says U.S. It's in one of these books. I found it. But the thing is if if the theory is true that somebody got these dies or somebody concealed these dies only later to be dug up, that would be a secret. If somebody had taken these ancient coins and buried them, which I don't believe ever happened, you know, all they'd have to do is stamp them out in the early 1800s, bury them for 30, 40 years, let them get a little patina on them, and then dig them up later. Have members in their own little secret society or whatever, or just create them out of thin air, and then just start selling them. And by the time people get literally addicted to collecting ancient coins, because you'll find people like me that enjoy Roman history, that wanted to have something more. You know, I wanted to have something more than a Michael Grant book on ancient emperors. I wanted to have a coin. I wanted to see what the guy looked like. If someone has been, it appears to me that someone has been controlling the money for 2,500 years. And that same person controlled all the money, even in the contemporary times when they started initiating all of these contemporary coins, the ones that I told you that come about with the same weight, at the same time, and every country on the globe all of a sudden has their own denominations, everything. It's the same people. Now, if there is a conspiracy, well, you call it a controlled order. And had it not been for Brutus attacking Julius Caesar, the word conspiracy would not even really have to be in the dictionary. We've had 4 American presidents assassinated in public in front of everybody, and not a single one of them was a conspiracy. A lot of them are represented on your coinage and your dollar bills. Like a little, yeah, we'll get you. We'll kick you out and we'll make you happy. We'll remember you. We stick Kennedy's head on a $50. We got a $5 bill we can pull out. It's got Washington on it. I mean Lincoln on it. And he's real big. He's on a penny and a dollar bill. And as you look through all this and you see how the currency changed through the years, the currencies and the denominations, as the ink changed on American, so did the ink change on the Arabian and the Egyptian and the British, India, Australian, German, Russian. All the bills change color, and they have the same colors. They have the same sizes. They have the same layout. They have all the same stuff on them. The only thing that's any different is what was happening at the old Confederate banks and how they backed their stuff up. Each bank was able to stamp out its own stuff, and it was all happy and good. The same people control the bills. Now, there's one last thing. I had to tell you this and present this to you in a way that I'm glad has been comical to you, to leave you with one last thing before Paul comes up here and we expose here for the first time something that is extremely important for each and every one of you to know. And I must leave it like this. The first person that we have on record that ever collected ancient coins, that ever collected and distributed and traded back and forth European coins in the late 1700s. Does anyone know who that person is? His name was Meyer Amstel Rothschild. Paul? Here, hold on a second.
Ichiwaiki. Okay, this segment here, I'm going to be introducing to you the flow of ancient languages and ancient scripts and how they relate to history. And some very recent research I've done, I've exposed one of the greatest historical hoaxes, and this is the first time that I'm announcing it. When I met Harry, he had a lot of great books on ancient languages and ancient scripts. I got interested in some that were dealing with Hebrew and Aramaic inscriptions. There was always like, okay, ancient Hebrew inscriptions. I'd look in the books, and it was always an ancient Hebrew block script. But a suspicion I always had is like, where is the actual manuscript? I want to see the manuscript. It was always this typed Hebrew block script. I wanted to see the manuscript. Put it aside. Well, Harry had an excellent collection on the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I enjoyed studying. He has the best collection that anybody has information on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Every book and a lot of pirated information out of Poland that you can only get at a very high price on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He introduced it to me 2 years ago, but I was busy with other projects, and I said, well, I'm going to put it aside for now. When we actually started getting suspicious of these ancient coins, for me it was actually due to something that happened to me back in 1988. I was up in Maine cutting wood and taking out a huge stump up at my uncle's cabin up in Harmony, Maine, 45 minutes north of Skowhegan, central Maine. And as we were pulling out the stump, there was a clump of dirt. It was almost 6 feet underground. This was a huge stump. There was this little clump of dirt, and I noticed something shining. I pulled it up. It took a while to clean it up completely. We put it through different solutions, and it cleaned up fairly well. In that clump was this coin here. Harry will bring it back tomorrow, which you can see at our table, the actual coin. But this is, we don't leave it out. This is actually a printed copy of the coin, forward with a head and a reverse. To me, it looked like it could be an ancient coin. Obviously, it was ancient. It was 6 feet under, it was dirty, and it was eroded in certain spots. But it was an ancient coin. But what bothered me was the script on it was very strange. It was a very strange script on it. And the first thing I decided to do was, okay, Harry, let's get some ancient coin books. That's before we figured out anything about ancient coin. Let's get some ancient Roman, Greek coins anywhere that's available, and let's find this coin here. We had no luck. I took it to university professors. Can you identify this? No, I don't know what it is. They just theorized and had no clue. Never seen anything like that. Then when we went to this coin convention in Orlando, we decided, well, maybe there's some ancient coin expert there that can tell me what in the world this coin is. We took it to some people, they don't know. Then we went to this expert, Dr. Saslow, who had these beautiful golden Alexander the Head coins for $10,000. And what really made me suspicious is when I walked up to a Ptolemy coin, and the funny thing was, on that coin, the word Ptolemy was written in Greek letters, but it was written like in English, Ptolemy, with the I at the end. In Greek, it was Ptolemaeus. And I looked at it, I said, this is written in English with Greek letters. And he was charging $15,000 for that gold coin. And we just said, boy, oh boy. That's when we realized that a lot of this was fake. And we just happened to show this coin, and he looked at it and threw it back like that. Oh, it's fake. It's a fantasy coin. Okay, excuse me, Dr. Sadlow. What is there about this coin here that is fake? Well, it's just a fantasy coin. You can make this, you get this out of a cereal box. Okay? With him and with others, we said, okay, please, you know that this is a fantasy coin. Would you please show us a fantasy coin? Just bring up a fantasy coin. Well, they made them all the time. I mean, these people made fantasy coins everywhere. They're just all over the place. Okay, could you please show us one? Nobody. Got very hostile over this coin, and I could not believe it. Why is somebody getting so emotional and hostile over a coin? Why didn't you just say, I don't know? It had a very strange inscription on it. Like you see right here. Very, very strange inscription. And I started looking at that, I just started, okay, I can read ancient Greek, I can read Latin, and I know the Hebrew block script. But what I need to do is, I need to study the origin of the alphabets to solve this mystery here. So I started to get a collection of many books, and Harry had some, of actual ancient inscriptions, letters that were written on papyri in Egyptian and Aramaic from anywhere from 2000 BC up to like 500 to the time of Christ. I wanted to see actual ancient documents in their writing. And had a lot of success. This is a book here called Syrian Semitic Inscriptions, Volume 2. I'll tell you something about Volume 1, which is very peculiar. It has a bunch of letters written in Semitic Aramaic from time before Christ. All had the Phoenician Aramaic inscription in cursive and a regular Phoenician script, as you see here. Now I was starting to see some similarities between this and coin, because this is some very old stuff that was found and that's authentic. And then I said, well, this is ancient Phoenician. It was a Semitic language, very akin to Hebrew, except that the biblical Hebrew had a very structured and formal grammar, which was based on the Latin grammar. There was the Greek grammar in ancient times, there was Latin grammar. And I noticed something about Old Testament Hebrew. It had a very nice structured grammar. It had tenses, it had declensions, and everything. I mean, just a perfect grammar. And when I looked at these ancient Semitic inscriptions, they didn't have a perfect grammar. They were more like agglutinative root words where you can understand the very basic that everybody wrote. And this is the pattern I was seeing on these ancient Semitic inscriptions. I said, fine, we still haven't found the answer to this coin. So I started studying more ancient inscriptions from Italy. And then when we came up with this tomb, I was able, with the artifacts from the cave here in North America, looked at the inscriptions and said, boy, this is something unusual. It's not something you see all the time. The only word where I've seen similar inscriptions to this and to inscriptions that were found in Burroughs Cave, Illinois, were in southern Spain and northern Africa. And I wanted to get some books on them. They were called Iberic inscriptions. They had the strange Phoenician-type alphabet. But the funny thing is, no scholar studied them. This is one thing you will never see in any school. They're kind of locked up in museums in Spain and Portugal. They're on display. Nobody knows what they say. Nobody has tried to translate them. They've had problems. They couldn't decipher them and all that. And when I deciphered the inscriptions from the cave, I found that they had an Indo-Germanic root very akin to Latin and Old Italic, very basic root. Noun, verb, subject, action, very simple writing. They wrote in different directions. Bostraphigian, which is where you start from left to right, and then the next line you go from right to left. There were direction writing up, down, up. Some of them written purely retrograde. All kinds of styles of writing. And it was a very, very basic form of communication. They wrote as they spoke. And you see the same thing when you read Egyptian hieroglyphs. The syntax is very different from modern languages. You have the entire hieroglyph, and it may say a sentence like, I'm saying an adoring prayer to Ra. You would say it in English. In Egyptian, the word order would be Ra, the great, adoring I, prayer, say. Strange word order, which is Egyptian syntax. But then you have to actually work. When you read the old language and decipher it, you actually have to work very hard in getting the meaning into correct English. That's the hardest part. Now, what Dr. Wallace Budge does in his books, some of you may have seen the Book of the Dead and all that, it's really nicely written. He has the hieroglyph, and on the bottom of it he writes the English translation, but you basically have to translate it in correct English yourself. Today you have new versions of Book of the Dead where they would just added a whole bunch of new things in there. And if you want to read the Book of the Dead, get Wallace Budge's Book of the Dead. That is the best and accurate translation. But this is one thing I noticed about all these ancient languages and these tablets that I deciphered. They had a very simple grammar, very simple syntax. And were relatively easy to read. You can make a free translation. Lots of abbreviations. When I studied Old Testament Hebrew and New Testament Greek is in fine grammar. It goes back to about 200 AD. You can see in the Coptic and all that, the New Testament, the Greek was such a refined grammar. It's pretty much case closed how it is. That existed. Old Testament Hebrew, I noticed, for one thing, it was written in this very perfectly structured grammar of Semitic language. And I kept on reading ancient Hebrew inscriptions. When I looked at ancient Hebrew, now volume 1 has a lot of pictures with ancient Hebrew. Now here there's Assyrian Semitic inscriptions. They call this one ancient Hebrew. I looked at it, it's in the Old Phoenician alphabet. As a Semitic scholar myself, I cannot tell the difference between Hebrew and Aramaic. The vocabulary is identical, except there are a few words in a dialect that are slightly different. But the one thing I question, the script is in the ancient Phoenician script. The language is in Semitic. How can somebody claim that this is Hebrew and this is Aramaic? I didn't know. Then I started studying the Old Testament a little more, and I noticed everything was in block Hebrew, neat script. I got very curious. I said, well, what is the oldest copy of the Old Testament there is? I want to know. Old scrolls of the Old Testament or something that I can look at. Well, as Harry and I do, we find the answers in Encyclopedia Judaica. Great set. If you ever want to know anything about ancient history or what's happening or contemporary people, look at Encyclopedia Judaica. Most libraries have. You'll find a lot of information there. We looked at Encyclopedia Judaica, ancient Hebrew inscriptions, especially the Bible, because we studied the Bible a lot too. Well, surprisingly, there were none. The earliest Old Testament inscription in Hebrew script comes from about 800 AD, and then it turned into the Masoretic texts. And I asked myself, where did it come from? Looked at the oldest manuscripts in this nice, beautiful block Hebrew script. Nice grammar, everything. And one thing I noticed about the Old Testament Hebrew and the block script and the grammar, that it is very much in Latin syntax. The Semitic language, which was very raw in Phoenician times, was taken, and with the help of the Greek grammar and the Latin grammar, it was structured. And all of a sudden, you see the appearance of the Hebrew block script with this beautifully structured grammar pop up in the Middle Ages about 750 to 800 AD. It's just everywhere. Just pops up out of nowhere, everywhere. Then I decided to do a little more research because I wasn't quite getting the picture. I said, well, let's look at some more ancient inscriptions, and I was coming back to these ancient alphabets that you find on stones and on papyri. That is a clue. In ancient times, around the time of Christ or before, anytime something was handwritten, they used the papyrus to write on. That was a very important thing that I ended up noticing. Papyrus and stone were the two main forms of communication. But another peculiar thing I noticed is when doing research, I decided to study the archaeology of the Middle East. Because one time I watched a television show when I was 14, and there was an old German archaeologist, I don't know if it was Maria Reike, who worked in Peru, but she also went to Israel and Egypt, and she made a statement. She said, and that really got me to second, she said there was absolutely no archaeological evidence that the Exodus ever happened, that David, Solomon, and Saul and all these great Israelite kings ever existed. I kept that in my background. No archaeological evidence at all. So I decided, okay, let's do some more research. So I was studying the Bible and everything. And then we decided, when Harry decided to get the entire ancient history collection for our tomb research and all this, we decided to read ancient historians. Let's find out if anything correlates. Well, there are a few sources that talk about the Hebrews. One source is the ancient Egyptian priest Manetho. And there's many other classical sources, but I really like Manetho because there was a stone from this cave in Illinois that I deciphered. There was a figure on the front that appeared to look like Moses. In the back of it, it gave a name. It was Ozar-Zeph. And I translated that 2 years ago. I had no idea what it meant, so I kind of put it aside. I grabbed Manetho, who wrote the history of Egypt, because what really bothered me the most about the Bible and Josephus and all these other texts is about the Exodus. They always call him Pharaoh, Pharaoh, Pharaoh. But nobody knows who the Pharaoh's name is. And all these scholars were debating it's Ramses II, it's Seti I, because this reason or that reason. So I started reading Manetho, and I had a very interesting account. He gives the name of the Pharaoh when an Exodus happened. Amenhotep III. I was like, did these people miss something or something? And the only story that Manetho and other ancient historians correlate to is that a group of people known as the Shepherds entered Egypt about 1500 BC and overthrew the Middle Kingdom, how we would know today. These shepherds ruled in Egypt for a period of 300 to 500 years. The Egyptian people revolted against these shepherds, which their name were called the Hyksos. They revolted against these shepherds, and they routed them to the city of Avaris north of the Delta. The shepherds were surrounded in that city by the Egyptian army, and they were about to be slaughtered when a priest of Heliopolis by the name of Osarsiv came out and agreed that he would lead the shepherds out of Egypt to the city of Jerusalem. And right there I found the name Ozarsiv, and it said later he was known to the Hebrews as Moses. This is a sign of an exodus. They said they were exiled to Jerusalem. They were outcasts. They were lepers. They were everything that was against Egyptian, and they ruled the country for several hundred years, and the Egyptians liberated them, and they moved to Jerusalem. Ancient historians also say they just stayed there. They were conquered by the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Hittites. All these empires were there. It always seemed like Palestine was a stomping ground for powerful kingdoms. There were just small vassal kings in Jerusalem and Judea, but there was never a sign of David, Solomon, or anything like that, which made me wonder, could it be just ancient folklore? People write novels and wonderful historical stories today. That could have been one of them back then, too. That's the only thing I could come up with. The whole thing, after the Exodus, the people settled there, and they just remained there until Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, and Ptolemies took over Egypt. Then the Hasmonean kingdom was put there, but there was absolutely nothing in any history that indicated David, Solomon, or any great kingdom. And then it made me realize, well, maybe this is why this archaeologist lady said that there was no archaeological evidence. By the late 1800s, they couldn't find anything. But then a very peculiar thing happened. Around the 1870s and 1880s, this old Phoenician script, which they found many tablets of Phoenician, was deciphered by scholars. That was in the mid to late 1800s. As soon as that happened, there was a German minister, I think he was a Lutheran minister, that traveled to the Holy Land. And all of a sudden, he comes up with this rubbing, this huge rubbing of this beautifully Phoenician script. And naturally, it was translated, it was written real perfectly. They translated it, and it just happened to match a story in the Old Testament, the king of Moab and his war with the Israelites. But the funny thing was, he took a rubbing of it. The story was that he went out in the desert, and he saw this big, huge black rock just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. A well-traveled place, but this big black rock just happened to be there. Nobody noticed it centuries before, but in 1885 it was just there, looking at him with this beautiful script. And naturally, this preacher knew how to read it. He took a rubbing off it. He took it back to Jerusalem, and 24 hours later, everybody knew the translation. I mean, it happened so fast. I mean, I can't even decipher a stone that I know real well in such a speed. I mean, this guy was out in the desert, met with the Arabs, took a rubbing, ran back to Jerusalem on his camel, and had the translation. The great Moabite stone confirms the story in the Old Testament. Well, then other people got all excited. All the scholars got excited. Well, we want to go see the Moabite stone. Well, guess what happened? Those damn Bedouin Arabs did not like the white people, you know, the Europeans coming in. And what they did is, to really aggravate him, they took that black Moabite stone and threw it in the fire, and it just burst into hundreds of little pieces. It was burnt up. Well, I've burnt stone before, too. Couldn't they just pick up fragments or something and show, well, this is a little piece of what was left, and here's a letter? No, there was absolutely nothing. It just turned into powder. Nobody saw anything. Well, they still had that rubbing. And today, you will see in any book here, Moabite stone. They took the rubbing and they kind of made a plaster casting out of it. And it's even in this book here. With the beautiful translation, it happens to be in a perfect grammar. Not in the older style Phoenician grammar, but in this modern Hebrew grammar with Latin syntax. But in the old writing, as soon as the old Phoenician script was deciphered. Well, and it's in here. You can look at it. There's a picture of the Moabite stone. Very famous. All scholars consider it authentic. Naturally, when we... The date of the stone was supposedly about 800 BC, something like that, when the Israelites... Oh, it's a long, long story. I can read it to you later. But it actually matched the Old Testament perfectly. Yeah, exactly. It matched that perfectly. But today you can go to the Hebrew University and the Moabite stone. It's authentic. But I mean, when other people bring artifacts and talk about it, and they're like, well, we have to see the stone or else it's a fake and all that. Well, guess what? Moabite stone doesn't exist. It's just a carving of it, but it's authentic. They've proven it. Well, they found another stone in Brazil. The Paraiba stone. I don't know if any of you ever read any books about transoceanic travel. This was found in 1810. A beautiful stone inscription with old Phoenician writing on it that was translated in the late 1800s by a noted scholar, Da Silva Ramos, who heard about the Phoenician translation. He was a good Semitic scholar. He translated. It told how a bunch of Phoenicians came around Africa from the Red Sea, and their ship got stranded, and they remained there, and they were praying to the gods, did a sacrifice, hoping that somebody would rescue them. It had old Semitic inscription on it, old Semitic syntax. It was 100% authentic. Well, the stone got stolen, and it's in probably some Brazilian president has it today. It's not in a museum. But the scholars today have the nerve to say, well, that stone is a fake because, number one, it was found in South America, and there was nobody there before Columbus. And, well, the stone disappeared. You know, we just have a photograph of it, so it's got to be fake. Well, the one that sounds right is a fake, but the Moabite stone, which they don't have anything, oh, that's authentic, of course. Well, it got me to do a little more research. And about 2 months ago, I told Harry, I want to start checking out your Dead Sea Scroll material. He has the whole story on the Dead Sea Scroll, the discovery of Qumran. And the reason I got interested in that is because a pastor that we know was in contact with a Dr. John Strugnell. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the Qumran caves in 1947, Dr. John Strugnell, from then on up to recently, has been the most noted scholar on the Dead Sea Scrolls. You find a magazine called Biblical Archaeology. That magazine was created only to give out the information on the Dead Sea Scrolls. If it was not for the Dead Sea Scrolls, that magazine would not exist. But there's one thing about Dr. John Strugnell. I think in late 89, early 90, he made a very derogatory statement about the Israeli scholars and about the church all along concerning the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they've been hushed up for so long. This is one thing that bothered me for years. What is this big hush-up deal over the Dead Sea Scroll? Is there some key information there that we're not supposed to know? Well, when Harry showed me the translation of the Dead Sea, there was nothing really derogatory. I mean, I couldn't see anything that would really upset a lot of people or anybody. It was all right information. A lot of it matched the Old Testament. It was written slightly different, but I could not see the information being a threat to anybody. Well, Dr. John Strugmel made a very derogatory statement in 1990 and actually slammed the Israelis completely and slammed the Catholic Church, and they denounced him. He became a total alcoholic, and he's kind of in hiding right now. So when we met this preacher, we wanted to ask some questions to Dr. John Strugmel because he was going to have a radio interview. We set up a few questions that we asked him. But he didn't get on the show up till now because he's still very in bad health right now. We hope soon we will get to talk to him because I want to confirm my theory to him. I felt like that there was something that Dr. John Strugmel knew that wasn't being released to the public. Not that he made derogatory statements or anything. I mean, this guy was working on the scrolls for over 30 years, and all of a sudden he was thrown out of it completely. Another thing, and he was the only secular scholar to work on the scrolls. The other scholars that you see, if you look at a Biblical Archaeology magazine, that are the top Dead Sea Scroll scholars are hardcore Catholic priests from the Vatican and hardcore Jewish Orthodox Jews. All hardcore religious people. The only one that worked on them at that time, Dr. John Strugmel, was thrown out of the project. Another thing bothered me. I know this Semitic scholar who lives in Beverly, Massachusetts, known as Dr. Cyrus H. Gordon. He is one of the foremost Semitic linguists in the world, if not the. He was hired by the Syrian government early in the 70s to translate some cuneiform texts found in the city of Ebla because he was so proficient in Semitic and the language was Semitic. Anything that was found ancient and Semitic, Dr. Cyrus Gordon was there to write about it because he was the best. And he was also a secular scholar. And he also translated and codified the Paraiba stone in Brazil. He went over, you know, as a Semitic scholar, he went out on a limb to even say, yes, there were Phoenician people in Brazil. He didn't, you know, at least I like him for that. He was very open-minded on that part. But what bothered me is, why didn't he ever work on the Dead Sea Scrolls? What was the deal? This guy is the best, and he's not working on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I ask too many questions that are stupid, but I get really suspicious about it. I ask a lot of dumb questions. When I was a kid in school, I always asked the most absurd questions to the teachers that they would throw me out of class. Just say, give him an A, get him out of here. But these are the kind of questions I asked. Then I said, okay, Harry, I want to look at your Dead Sea Scroll material because some of the earlier books had this nice printed Hebrew block script on it. And with the translation, I said, that's not good enough. I want to see Dead Sea Scroll fragments. He had them. He dug them up and he had them. Well, there's one funny thing I noticed. All these Dead Sea Scroll scholars, these religious scholars, are saying that they date anywhere from 200 to 300 BC to maybe 100 AD to the time of Christ. Okay. Well, I've had plenty of other inscriptions, Semitic inscriptions here, from that time era, all written in cursive Phoenician, which you can all come and look at and explain. Nice cursive Phoenician, like this here, beautifully in the Aramaic script. That's what I expected to see. Well, I have every piece of material on the Dead Sea Scrolls, fragments, and I look at them. I noticed something funny. I said, well, maybe there's just one here, and there's just one there. I look at the script on the Dead Sea Scrolls. The first one I look at was not a Dead Sea Scroll, but they say it was a scroll contemporary to that time called the Damascus Scroll, found in the synagogue in Cairo, Egypt. It had this beautiful block Hebrew script. Well, let's forget that one. I go back and look at the most famous scroll that everybody in every Dead Sea Scroll book calls the Temple Scroll. And I looked at that one and other ones, and it is in cursive block Hebrew script as written in the nation of Israel today. Then I said to myself, I looked at every single one of them, block Hebrew cursive script. I said, well, maybe this is just an interpretation that a scholar made. No, it's the actual scroll that was found. Another peculiarity I noticed was that all the Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran were written on vermilion sheepskin. Vermilion. Okay. All I know in ancient times is that they wrote on papyrus. But I said to myself, okay, they found these scrolls here. It's in Hebrew block script. I look back. I actually really had to say to myself, okay, I know there's something wrong here. I got to look back to the ancient alphabet. Where did the Hebrew block script come from? Well, it started around the 1st century A.D. The kingdom of Petra, called the kingdom of the Nabateans. They had monuments, and they had a script that was not Hebrew block script, but it was a type of block script which Hebrew derived from 1st century A.D. Then in 2nd and 3rd century A.D., they had the script of Palmyra, which was in Syria, and from that derived the Syriac script. I could see a pattern. There were a bunch of Pharisees in Syria in the 3rd or 4th centuries that had the old Babylonian Talmud, and what they did is they adopted the old Palmyrene script from 200 A.D., and they wrote their Talmuds and their Torahs with it. And then all of a sudden, you notice about 800 A.D., the perfect Hebrew block script in the Torah scrolls comes about. That's the oldest ones you can find. But I said to myself, if these Dead Sea Scrolls stem from 200 BC to 100 AD, why are they written in Hebrew block script? There's something wrong here. And why are they written on vermilion sheepskin? I did a little research on vermilion sheepskin. Those maps that you seen at the lecture of the inner earth and all that from the 1500s, all these old maps from the 1200s, anything written on to the 1500s, were written on vermilion. Then I started getting a clue, well, who could have deposited the Dead Sea Scrolls? And the famous one was the Temple Scroll, talking about the gold of the temple, the treasure of the temple, and all that. Okay, I look back, vermilion sheepskin. The Hebrew block script on the Dead Sea Scroll looked very much like some block Hebrew script that was found around the 10 to the 1100s. Okay, then I said to myself, well, does anybody know who ruled Jerusalem in the late 1100s? You're right. The Crusaders, the Knights Templars, Godfrey from Bouillon, Jerusalem, 1100 AD. And that made sense to me. Written on vermilion skin, block Hebrew script, the Knights Templars deposited there. They took some Pharisee Jewish rabbis with them to codify a history and an Old Testament. They needed something to prove the originality. That's what I came up with. Knights Templars. They deposited them there. Another thing I studied is there is the famous copper scroll that was found in Qumran right near the Dead Sea. Now, as you know, the Dead Sea is a very, very salty sea. The wind and air blows, and there's a lot of salt air. When I was a kid, I used to play with a chemistry set a lot. And I used to get a little vial of copper where I could play with, cut the copper and do my experiments. But one time I had a bunch of copper wrapped up and I left it out. Well, after a few days, I noticed it started turning green. I left it out for a month with a little moisture here and there. It got terribly corroded. Well, there's this famous copper scroll that was found in one of the Qumran caves. It had slight green corrosion on it. And what they ended up doing is this copper scroll was rolled up in block Hebrew script, and it had a coat of green corrosion on it. In a dry air or something, if it was 2,000 years old, it wouldn't have lasted in the salt air. But the strange thing they did is, you could really tell how they could appreciate such ancient art, an artifact like that. You have a thin, very thin copper scroll rolled up. Now, I would think that if I was very careful, I had a precious ancient artifact here, I would unroll it very slowly, the whole thing, and flatten it out. No, they had to get this piece of equipment. How much did it cost?
I think it was $500,000.
$500,000. A little saw of a 10,000 millimeter. And they chopped that copper scroll up into little tiny square fragments and just banged it together. I mean, is that how you treat an ancient artifact? And they're writing a whole article about the copper scroll in there, bragging about how they chopped this thing up into little pieces and soldered it back together with solder. And I'm like, you know, they found these beautiful Etruscan gold foils in Pergi, and I mean, they went through a lot of trouble to uncover them. I mean, those were like from 500 BC, but the copper scroll here, chop it up, we'll solder it back together, we'll write something about it. That's the way you treat something. And the funny thing is the corrosion in the copper was very minimal. Not for maybe a few centuries, I would say, okay, in dry air, but not 2,000 years. So I put together that who could have done this and what effect does it have on everybody today? Well, let's say the Knight Templars retook Jerusalem. Naturally, they would. At that time, they didn't know about the Phoenician alphabet. So they decided, this is my theory, what happened, when Godfrey of Bouillon of the Knights Templars came in, they had to create something to make them look like they're the seed line of God and the seed line of Christ, that they have a right to that land. So what they did is they took a Jewish Talmud scholar, brought him with them, and told him, okay, we have the Old Testament and the Bible as there, but we want to write our own version and write it in the ancient Hebrew script as they knew it. And they wrote it on vermilion because they had no access to papyrus at that time. Egypt was under the Muslims, and they didn't use it, but they had no access to papyrus. So the only thing they knew is vermilion sheepskin. That's all they had to write on, and that's what they did. And they deposited in the Qumran caves the great temple scroll, all the old books of the Old Testament, everything, put in there and sealed up. Well, eventually they were driven out by the Muslims, and one thing I don't understand is that Qumran area was very well traveled. Now, either somebody was guarding it the whole time, who knows? But the peculiar thing was that in 1947 they were found when the State of Israel was created. The State of Israel was created, and boom, these Dead Sea Scrolls were found right there in the Qumran caves. And just happened, some shepherd boy just happened to come by and throw a stone in there, and oops, well, we got to look in here. Nobody ever, didn't dawn to anybody to look at it before. So what I'm thinking, maybe somebody was there the whole time for centuries guarding it or something and told them, stay away, and okay, let's open the doors and seals, and one of these Arabs will find it, and we got this great discovery. So now this explains to me what the whole hoopla was over the Dead Sea Scrolls. It wasn't the content of the scrolls or the information. I think it was that somebody, an intelligent scholar, would be able to detect that it was written in the block Hebrew script and not in the old script it should have been written in, and would have called a fraud on it. So they took their time in releasing it. And biblical archaeology by Herschel Shanks thrives on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Another peculiarity with biblical archaeology is all of a sudden you're finding these collections that were found in Israel. You can go anywhere in Jerusalem now and dig. An Israeli archaeological expedition will dig in Jerusalem, and they're guaranteed to find artifacts saying King David on there in English syntax. Recently, they found the tombstone of Caiaphas, written in block Hebrew script. We found the tombstone of Caiaphas, one of the Pharisees that judged Christ. Just popped out of nowhere. Nobody's seen it before, but now I think you can even buy it now. Probably in extra fine condition. You have that piece of paper you showed me earlier today?
No, I didn't bring it.
Okay, Harry found something very peculiar. I'll show it. From the Sadiq Gallery, there was a piece of paper there. It said that you can buy a Hebrew scroll on vermilion from 1100 AD for $49,000. Hebrew block script scroll on vermilion for $49,000. And they tell you 1100s. That's an actual one from the 1100s on sheepskin for $49,000. So that explained to me it's the same thing as the Dead Sea Scrolls, that they got it somewhere else. There it is. So I'm asking myself, okay, put all this together. The Knights Templars deposit the scrolls there. The State of Israel gets created. which for a lot of people know that the whole thing was owned by the Masons and the Templars, and they owned the whole state and everything. These scrolls get given. So why did they do that? Well, I guess they're trying to use religion as a form of control. I'm not saying that the Bible is not true or anything, because I really enjoy it. But what has been done to this book and to the teachings of Christ, and even if it's old stories, when you read the Genesis, Old Testament, there's some stories in there that very much match the old Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiforms of creation and all that. Obviously, this had a source in other writings. It's a very good thing. But what has been done is, the aliens or whoever, what I can see in all religion, the powers that control, they have taken, even in the Egyptian religion, you see the same thing happen. Rules, rules, rules. You must do this, you must do that. Don't do this, don't do that. I don't want to live under rules like that. If you don't go to heaven. If you don't, you will not be mummified and get eternal life. You see the same pattern. And it's going on, especially now with the Bible. What they have done with this book is they have twisted it so badly, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and especially since the King James Bible came out, 1611. The King James Bible, the originator, that is the Geneva Bible. And at that time you have John Calvin and all his group involved in it. And what they've done is, especially with the English language, they have taken it and they have done so many things to it. A lot of church denominations we have right now are due to a mistranslation in the English. If it had stayed originally in the Greek or the Hebrew, you would only have one denomination. All the denominations were created through translations, and that's how the dogmas are. And this is one thing I see about Christianity and all the religions. Why all these denominations? You divide them, one fights the other, you turn them into a business, and none of them are united. You have so many forms of Christianity right now. Pentecostals, Anglicans, Catholics, Byzantine, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, tons of them. But all profess to be following the teachings of Christ. If everybody just had read the New Testament in the Greek the way it was, there would only be one way. So what they've done is they have taken a very holy book and the teachings of a great Savior, and what the Bible means to a lot of people is it's something sacred. They have taken it, and what they've done is they have twisted it completely to create so many denominations that now you have one church group fighting the other. Now it's like a business. Well, I got to build my church here, and I got competition. I got to get these people here so they can put their money in a basket every Sunday. This is what we have now. And it's all controlled by the high priests in our government. They control everything. And as long as they keep everybody divided and everybody bickering one another, they have nothing to worry about. Divide and conquer. And that's what I seen happen. And what they're doing is they're codifying it, with the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is a big, big thing. Everybody needs to know that they're using them right now to make a lot of money off of people. They're making money off of scholars. They're making money off of magazines. And it's terrible. I mean, this is what Harry and I are here for. We want to bring this information out, and we want to stop any fraud, because it is not fair to be messing with anybody's belief system. If they believe in something, it is really cruel for a high power to be really deceiving people on belief systems and all that. And the truth needs to come out. Final thing I want to show on scripts for is that here you have the ancient Phoenician scripts of olden times. I always wondered, where did it originate? A lot of scholars were saying, well, it originated from Egyptian hieroglyphs written in cursive form. But some of the letters didn't match and all that. And I always wondered where the Phoenician or the Aryan alphabet, which our modern alphabet right now is a descendant of, where it originated from. Well, I couldn't really find a point of origin. You had the Egyptian hieroglyphs, you had Sumerian hieroglyphs, you had the Akkadian, and all of a sudden, around 2000 BC, comes this beautiful commercial alphabet. It just pops out of nowhere. And it's more convenient than hieroglyphs and the hard chicken scratch cuneiform. It's a very excellent commercial script like ours today. You can write. Beautiful to write. Where did it come from? Well, funny thing. Have any of you seen the video, Alien Autopsy? They show you some beams, supposedly from a crashed saucer at Roswell. And on these beams, there are alphabetical characters. When you look at them, you will see that they're not ancient block Hebrew script. When you look at them, you will find that they match very closely to the oldest form of the Phoenician alphabet. That may be where the origin is. Now, another deception that I have just recently, just this week, discovered is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Drumbelow Melchizedek's work and Winter's work. Some of the metaphysical things I can't argue. If I can't prove it wrong, I leave it alone. I can't argue. But there is one thing that he is stating that is a total crock. And that is when he takes the tetrahedron and he tells everybody, I had a phone call from God Tot, and he told me this is how I gave humankind the ancient alphabet. The God Tot gave one alphabet to people. He introduced the Egyptian hieroglyphs to the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians. That is the script he introduced them to. What Drumbelow tries to show you is that with a tetrahedron, how when you turn a tetrahedron a certain way, you get a cursive character of the Hebrew block script. Well, there's a problem with that. It didn't exist back then. And even though I looked at it, I really had to use my imagination to even make the Hebrew block script out of it. Now, if he took it and said, well, I get some cursive hieratic or Old Phoenician out of it, I could probably say, well, that's believable. But when he started with the Hebrew block script, and another person by the name of Winter did the same thing, and he says, well, notice how you can make the alphabet. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. And when he put the J there, I was like, oh my, didn't you know that the J did not exist in ancient times? Things like that. And if I can catch them, you know, if I can catch people making mistakes and deceiving, it's not fair to deceive people. Another thing he did is he showed the old megalith in England, Stonehenge, like this here. And he was saying, well, he had a vision, and here is, you can see these stones formed, letter D for Druid. I'm not saying, okay, these things existed 6,000 BC, and they knew the English letter D. Beats me. I mean, maybe I'm asking tough questions here, but it beats me. Another peculiar thing that's very interesting is a lot of scholars will deny. See, our cave project here in Illinois has taken us to a lot of avenues. There have been found in Brazil and in Peru statues that clearly prove that the ancient Egyptians were here in the Americas. This is one of my little favorite ones. A good colleague of mine sent a copy. I also found it in this book here. There's this little black basalt Egyptian statuette that was found in the jungles of the Amazon in some ancient city. And what I looked at it, and of course, the bizarreness of the script right there, to me, spells authenticity. I had to look very hard to decipher it. It's one of these strange inscriptions that you find that very few scholars even know about. Hard, beautiful basalt in the Egyptian style. Looked at it, it was an Egyptian form of writing that the Libyans used. The Western Desert Libyans used around from 800 to 500 BC, which later on became a Numidian inscription in North Africa. And it gives the name of Pharaoh Shabaka, one of the Nubian pharaohs of Egypt that ruled from 750 BC. What made this so significant is that the Nubian pharaohs hired a lot of Phoenician seamen for trade. And they made it to Egypt possibly for minerals and all that. You do find a lot of these things in the Americas They will not tell you in the media. They will deny it. The schools will call everything fake, but there are tons and tons of artifacts found in North and South America that clearly depict ancient writing and that the ancients have been here. Eric von Daniken, I don't know how many of you are familiar with him. He's famous with the Ancient Astronaut Society. He went to Peru and visited an old priest in Ecuador, visited an old priest named Father Crespi. This man had a tremendous collection of gold artifacts and stones with inscriptions all over them, made out of solid gold. And he got them because he did a lot of favors for the local Indian people. He was nice to them, he fed them, he gave them a meal. And what they did is they went out in the mountains and the jungle, and whatever artifacts or whatever they brought back to him, and he amassed a huge collection. And the quantity of gold was just astronomical. The gold had writing on it, it had beautiful pictures, it had pyramids. If some of you have seen the book Gold of the Gods, it's in there. But there's some good pictures here. Big, huge gold stela with script on it. Script here, script down here. Beautiful thing. And all the scholars and professors ignored it completely. They wouldn't even look at it. If it was not for Eric von Daniken, we would not even know about this wonderful collection. They just ignored it, and when Father Crespi died, all the artifacts got scattered again, and a lot of them are lost. It's another unfortunate thing. So there's so much evidence around that points that this was a small world back in ancient times. People sailed back and forth. And I don't understand why government or the establishment is completely covering up such knowledge, because it's just treasure.
What about the origin of the Mormons, like the Moroni and the golden tablets of the tablets?
I have to be very neutral about one thing as a scholar. I need to see the tablets. I haven't seen any of them. I've been told by Brigham Young, I said I would like to look at them and analyze them. They said, oh yeah, we'll send them to them. We have not received any confirmation. I've never seen the tablets, so I cannot really have an opinion on it. But Harry would like to add something too?
I've read the Book of Mormon 4 times, and when you start talking about tablets in the Book of Mormon, you've got breastplates, knee plates, chin plates, head plates. You've got silver plates, copper plates, gold plates. All I did was ask for one. And we went to the hierarchy of the Mormon church. They said, yeah, we'll send you some pictures. And when people find out that you read ancient script, the people like the drum blows run. They're not going to show you their stuff. They're not going to try to get you anything. There is nothing there that we can show that we can substantiate anything.
How about the race of people that came over from Jerusalem that founded the original Moroni?
Well, it's something that requires a lot of faith. And that's what we do, is we separate the faith from the reality. If something is something that's required, it requires you to have faith to believe, and that's your faith, I'm certainly not going to knock any man for his faith. But there is nothing to substantiate.
What about the race of people that came over from Jerusalem? Did they away from that?
I'm attempting to explain to you that there is nothing to support that. There is nothing to support it. There is nothing to support that there ever was the Nephites, the Lamanites, the Amalekites, or that there ever was a lake of Zarahemla, the land of Zarahemla.
People that you just found in the cave, the Alexander and people like that.
Okay, that's
We have artifacts.
later date. And what was your question concerning that?
Well, I was going to say maybe they came over with that.
No.
There's
No.
absolutely no correlation.
There's no correlation really, because we have artifacts that tell a story here, and there's actual substantial proof there. So we have to go by historical records. We can't go by speculation. Now, there have been, however, this is another thing that bothered me. There have been attempts by a lot of Mormon groups, is that there's 2 great inscriptions found in North America. There's the Las Lunas inscription, called the Ten Commandments inscriptions, and also the Ohio Decalogue. These are like 2... They're very big with the Epigraphic Society and other places, is they find these stones with the 10 Commandments on them, just in the Bible, happen to be in the same order as in the Old Testament. But the problem is, they're in English syntax. So it's obvious that whoever did that is they knew the Hebrew alphabet. It's written in a block Hebrew. They knew the Hebrew alphabet. They took it out of an English Bible and translated it into Hebrew. And you can tell with the order, I mean, it's so obvious that it was concocted in the 1800s.
Is that
Yes, yes.
Yes.
It has. It's Hebrew and English syntax, and that's right there made it.
I haven't deciphered that coin yet, the one that showed me.
Yes, but there was one other thing, what's still fresh in the minds of the Dead Sea Scrolls, saying that we are saying now that they are fake, and that they are all fraud. Studying them closer, we are not handwriting specialists. However, Dr. John Strugnell was. And one of the things that we notice is it appears that most of them are written by the same hand.
I had a coworker, a Jewish coworker back in the 60s that had a paperback book called The Copper Scrolls. He claimed that that it conflicted with some of Christianity's tenets, and therefore Christianity had suppressed the book and stole them out of libraries, and they were no longer available. Over the years, I've looked in used bookstores for that book, Copper Scrolls. Have you guys got that book? And what did it say? Did it conflict with the Dead Sea Scrolls, for instance?
You want me to answer that? In several points of case, you'll find something, just a small inscription of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and scholars will bicker like crazy over just what one sentence means or says. They will concoct a certain script and then put brackets, which means that it doesn't exist, and they will take that and they will add to it what they believe is there. Now, there were lots of problems. What they were saying is that they dated from 300 to 200 BC, but a lot of the scrolls talked about the rabbi teacher, which they thought depicted Christ, way up to like 120 AD. So there's a big conflict there. It was like, well, was it after the New Testament or was it before the New Testament? And so, as far as the conflict with Christianity, there is a big conflict with what the role of Christ was and what he did and what some of these scrolls depict. And here again, what the modern scholars will tell you is that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written by the Essenes at Qumran. The only person that writes about the Essenes is Josephus.
1000s.
But do you guys have that book in your collection?
Josephus?
No, the Copper Scrolls.
Yes, I have all the copper scrolls and all that.
We got it.
It's not of anything of major significance at all.
Okay. Second question, Billy Myers, Talmud of Jamal. Is that thing accurate?
The Billy Meyer Talmud?
Well, Billy Myers, the guy that got
I
it
would
published,
question
that
anyone.
got it published, but Talmud of Jamal, I believe.
Yeah,
Jamal.
question anything that says Talmud on it with a big question mark. Question anyone who says that they have the block Hebrew script in a tetrahedron and spin it. It's just a bunch of bunk. It did not exist, and they're trying to make things exist that never did exist.
But you guys haven't actually examined that document then?
I've looked at it and then just neglect. I have too much reading to do with my life. I don't read any fiction, and that I would consider to be fiction.
The book In Plain Sight, have you read that?
In plain sight, yes. We are very good friends with Gloria Farley.
Yes.
What do you think of that? Is that Ogham or is this?
No, there is no Ogham in North America.
Okay.
The Ogham that you have, that what people claim is all, they say it's Gaelic, Arabic, this and that. All Ogham in England, France, Scotland is all Latin. It is not in Arabic or hair Ogham, tooth Ogham, toe Ogham. They've got phallic Ogham. They've got every kind of Ogham. There's like 500 kinds of Ogham, and it's just a bunch of bunk.
So you think her work that she did is...
Yes, and she knows how we feel about her work. Now, I love Gloria Farley. I mean, she's a great friend of ours, and I could call her up right now and say, "Hi, Gloria, what you doing?" But her book, In Plain Sight, is just a concocted myth, a fallacy.
Well, talk about the channel.
Mr. I forget you. Yes, we want to take.
I wanted to make a comment about what you were doing with the Mormons, in that most people do not know that when the Mormon people moved from the west coast to the east coast, they stayed in an area very close to the Burroughs Caves for about 2 years. Some of the things that they have could have come out of the Burroughs Cave. And so you may be looking at some of the same things that you got right there if the Mormon church would show it to you. So that's from my perspective.
We have seen what the Mormon Church of Brigham Young has, as far as we haven't seen the original plates from New York, but they did gather artifacts called the Michigan Tablets. There's like thousands of artifacts that
30,000.
they claim 30,000, but I've only seen less than 100 actually, a collection of videos and all that. And they're stone-carved artifacts where when you look at them, you see saw marks on the side of the rocks. They have a script on it that is completely concocted, nothing. And the funny thing is, they have a lot of drawings that are only biblical Old and New Testament drawings. Yeah, with English syntax, it has Adam and Eve picking an apple off a tree, which in the Old Hebrew, it doesn't really, it's a metaphor, it doesn't depict that. Has that, it has Noah's Ark with animals going 2 by 2 inside and all that. It's just,
There's one Michigan tablet. Now, you've got to
like in the late 1800s, what the Christianity of the late 1800s of Mormons is depicted in those Michigan tablets. And
the Mormons are scrambling for the Michigan tablets, or what is known as the Soper plates.
yeah.
And there's so many incorrect historical things. Like they have a ship of what they consider to be Noah's Ark, and they have it built from the front going to the back, just as clear as day on this tablet. When you build a ship, you build the hull first, and then you put the sides on the hull. It's just completely structurally, data-wise, totally incorrect.
This gentleman.
The wide geographic distribution of Egyptian artifacts suggests one of two possibilities. One, that there was prehistoric transatlantic transportation. The second possibility is that during that time, Earth was a single continent before tectonic plates had moved apart. How far back do you think this pushes the envelope of the first beginning of
Okay.
human civilization?
Be very careful with tectonic plates. That's a dogma that's taught in the universities.
They're now changing it.
They're changing it continuously with the glaciers and all that. That's another subject. At the time, but yeah, that whole Pangea. I agree. The only thing I agree with is, like Robert Morning Sky made an analogy that planet Earth was smashed, and the mass was on one end, and that when the Earth healed itself, that's how the continents. But that happened a very, very long time ago. What we're talking about is like 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years ago. It happened. If anything like that happened, it happened way thousands of years before that. So it was basically oceanic travel. They had the ships to do that. This gentleman.
Well, let me just follow
Okay.
up on your tectonic plate theory and the Gondwana or the continental drift. There are no fossils at the same depths that are identical between here and South America, here and Asia, Africa. There are no dinosaur relics or fossils or beasts that are congruent between here, Australia, and everywhere else. There's no fauna. There's nothing really to support it. And you also remember that a lot of these theories were concocted in the 20s, when we really didn't even have telephone in every house. And you got to put a lot of that in perspective. Same as the polar ice cap theory. My question is, where did the water come from? And you know, a lot of other questions as well. And they're changing a lot of this. They're changing it now as we speak. They're changing the printing. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us the value of the Rosetta Stone?
Extremely valuable. The Rosetta Stone is the most valuable artifact ever found in linguistics because it enabled the decipherment of the Egyptian hieroglyphs.
How do you know it's real? How do you know they didn't put that in?
Well,
No, they didn't put
there
that-
are some
this-
big questions of who found it, when actually they found it. But the point is that it wasn't that they were able to lift the decipherments from it.
Yeah.
And cohesively translate mnemonic
Yeah, they had the middle is.
and glyph.
The middle inscription was an ancient Egyptian demotic. Nobody knew how to translate the hieroglyphs. The only readable part was the Greek, and it was an old Attic Greek. And that's how they were able to decipher it. They found many.
True, but they don't know. You don't know for sure whether somebody set it up.
Nobody could have set it up because of the age and all that. It named the king on there in hieroglyphs and everything. I mean, it was clearly an old artifact.
Point being, when you have
The syntax.
when you have an undeciphered script
Right,
that no one in the world knows, how can you fake it?
exactly.
In 1927, Zinkley discovered some in a library, forget where,
Nipper.
discovered some Essene texts, he said. Now, have you heard about those manuscripts and what's...
Be careful of the Essenes. The fact that there again, the only historical evidence we have to back them up is Josephus, and I can prove equivocally in 2 hours hundreds of reasons how come Josephus is bogus. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One, The Egyptologist, and I don't recall whether it's,
What's the question?
the question is, there's claim that the Dead Sea Scrolls, the government has hung on, not our government, the Egyptian government, whoever,
Israeli government.
has held on to them and only allowed our science people in one university to look at just a couple. They've never released the rest of them. So all these fakes you're talking about are probably fakes. I don't know. I was wondering if you heard anything else on that same area. The fact that there's only 2 of them been allowed our science.
Well, we've gotten, recently they've released a lot of them. We've gotten a lot of them right now. But that was earlier, that's all they released now. But none of them, but all of them, what they did is I think they tested the water back then when they only released 2 to see if anybody would catch on. And another thing I noticed is why did they wait till now? One big problem I have, there's only one Semitic scholar around in the world, that's Cyrus Gordon. He's in his late 80s. In the late 1800s to the early 1900s, up to World War II, there were a lot of brilliant ancient linguistic scholars. A lot of them got killed off in the Second World War, which was a war to kill off a lot of intelligent people. After that, in the 50s, you had a few, 60s, 70s, gradually they died off. Today, you have very few people that have that ability. Almost zero. So I guess now they can release them because nobody would notice the difference.
How about this gentleman in the yellow shirt?
Please, the second question, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Are you acquainted with the borderline sciences?
Yes, sir. I'm very good friends with Dr. Thomas.
All right. Have you read their information on the Egyptian caves in the Grand Canyon? Are you
Yes, sir.
familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of artifacts in there that relate to Egypt.
Yes, and the Smithsonian has a bunch of the tablets, and when I tried to get copies of them,
No, they refute.
they won't send
No,
them to
they
us.
say they don't acknowledge it at all.
But I'm
It's a-
sure he could knock them out, no problem.
Yeah.
It's in a special Indian reservation where the public are not allowed.
Yeah.
I know.
It's in the
Okay,
Grand
yeah, you-
Canyon.
Earlier tonight, I was talking to you, you mentioned about a little island that you like on those maps specifically, and there's a tie in my mind back in the Phoenician thing and getting into the occultic aspect of the Illuminati and all that. I wonder if you had made any connections there that may tie into this alien equation, because von Däniken's work is so substantial related
Well,
to, visitation and all that. Anything?
Some inscriptions in South America in the Old Semitic have, that I found in Daniken's book, depict alien craft too, which didn't surprise me. As far as that little island goes on our map, all we know is that it was settled by Norsemen and Icelandic people in English, and that it sunk in the late 1600s. That's the only conclusion I can arrive at.
The problem with the tablets from Father Crespi's collection and how the scholars just buffed it off is, I want to ask you, are you going to fake something in solid gold? That's a dumb question. Would you fake something in solid gold? I wouldn't.
You have to be a millionaire to do it.
Let me get, right here.
The work that the Hebrew University is doing on the Torah with the Bible code that Grant Jeffrey talked about,
Yep.
are they basing that on the Dead Sea Scrolls?
They're basing it entirely on block Hebrew script.
It's rather amazing because it mentions like ancient rabbis that weren't even born yet, their addresses and things like that.
You can take, this is the beauty with the Hebrew lettering. You can put it all together, and you can basically, well, the nice thing is the Hebrew alphabet does not have very many vowels. It's a very consonantal script. So you can take anything in any direction, and I can predict that Bill Clinton's election in 1992. Now, it's a little more difficult with English because you have vowels and all that, but with a consonantal alphabet, you can really concoct anything you want. I can take the Bible code and make prophecies all day and night, and you'll be convinced that it's accurate.
Back up here against the wall.
I've got two questions. One is, your best guess, you talked about, well, if there's just one creator or one source for all this, how far back does the source of this religion go, that the Bible and the Kabbalah and everything come from? What is the truth?
Okay. What you find is you find stories of the flood and all that in the Sumerian Akkadian library in Nineveh that go back to Sumerian times. That's where you find that version. Want to add on?
Also, if you look at the Bible, let's just undogmatically look at it metaphorically for a second. You'll find in one ancient religion direct correlation between Cain and Abel, but they happened before the Adam and the Eve. If you look at the Adam and Eve story, you can pull Hera and Zeus and Hera out of it. And then you can pull the flood and certain specific large events in the Bible, the Old Testament, that are represented with like the Maharabi texts and some of the other things that were found in the Ur and the old Sumer disc seals up the Indus Valley, and with Egyptian glyph as well. So it's still an undefined set. I tell you, I don't know.
Okay. My other question is, do you know anything about this date of time around 2011 where the Mayan calendar and a lot of stuff, it almost seems to total?
Okay. Let me tell you one thing, and this will be another total lecture in itself. Do not believe anything you have ever read on Mayan glyphs or Mayan calendar. The decipherments of the Mayan glyphs came out one way. You're going to read all this book about this wonderful man named Yuri Knorosov from the Soviet Union who picked up this piece of paper in World War. Berlin was on fire. The guy was an NKVD agent. Picked up this piece of paper that was half on fire from the Berlin Museum, had some Mayan glyphs. Takes it back to Russia. 1952, he announces, I've discovered the secret of the Mayan glyphs. Okay, wonderful. All scholars are waiting. Okay, he deciphers the Mayan glyphs. And a lot of you, if you read Mayan, get the book by Michael Coe, and you get all this Knorosov research of these beautiful Mayan glyphs. Chief smoking squirrel, chief jewel skull, the most pathetic translations that can't imagine anybody writing. Did some research on that too. Well, all the Soviet scholars got really interested in Mayan glyphs in the late 60s, early 70s. They were going by the planefuls into Mexico City. What was is they figured out a way. They needed to get into Mexico to spread their revolution. And I've had books, if you read the KGB and at Russian, you will hear the story of 1972 where a KGB coup was initiated in Mexico and it failed. And the way they got their KGB agents in is there's all these Soviets that were studying Mayan glyphs that needed to go to Mexico to read, and that's the whole thing. But the unfortunate thing is today you will still read books about Knorosov, Tatyanov, and all the Mayan glyphs, and there's absolutely nothing to back up anything that they're saying. We have a colleague in Florida who's an Orientalist, and he is studying the Mayan glyphs in detail, and a couple things I can reveal. What you've read, none of it is true. Number two, they all were dating the Maya glyphs to 800 AD and all that time, you know, around the time of Christ, 800 AD, 1100, and they suddenly disappeared. Those Mayan monuments are a lot older than what they say they are. This comes from a pre-archaic time. I'd say more like 5,000 to 6,000 BC.
This lady right here.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. It could very well be, ma'am. You know, the thing is, you can't date a piece. You can't date a rock. How they date certain stuff is by how deep it is in the ground. So you know, there are several things that appear to. Yes, ma'am. And how do you find a gold chain in coal 90 feet in the ground? I don't know.
They're dating some of Mount St. Helens now at 2.8 million years ago, and that's only happened 11 years ago.
Yes.
So I argue with the geologists on many points, and I think his archaeology is right and the geology is wrong.
Yes, ma'am.
The Bible has a lot of misinformation in it, and who and what was Jesus Christ, and was he actually what they said in there, and who wrote all the information about him, and how did they write it, and how did they find it to put it in the Bible?
Okay. Most of the misinformation in dictionary you have in the Old Testament. Now, the New Testament is key thing. Number one, you do have documents written in Greek dating from 150 AD talking the Gospels of Jesus Christ, written in Greek. That's available as you read it in the Greek.
It's good Greek.
It's very good Greek, exactly. From that time period, and the Copts, the early Coptic Egyptians write about that too, from that time. Okay, that is very important literature at that time, which says one thing to me. The event happened. They wrote it on papyrus. But the aging and all that, it tells the one thing, yes, it did happen. Because people went out of their way, it's recorded in history, all the martyrs and everybody risked their life to spread the gospel, so apparently the life of Christ did happen. But they took a lot. The only thing I do see is that a lot of the teachings in the English Bible, they twist a lot of the teachings of Christ to make it sound differently. When you read it in the Greek, it can mean a completely different thing.
And then one part where it says, seek ye first the kingdom of God within, and all things shall be added unto you. They took out within out, and they say, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all things shall be added. Right there is a change.
Well, there are still many problems with the New Testament. Like one, for instance, is I believe that the story is in Matthew 4, where Jesus went up on the mountain with Satan. Well, then who recorded it? Was Matthew or John over there? Did Jesus come, hey, I've been hanging out with Satan? You know, who recorded it? Who said that? And he goes, all of this I will give you if you will bow down and worship me. When he already owned it. There's a lot of enigmas. There are problems with it still, but it's not a lot. The point with it was when it was changed to make it look more like the need for government, the need for financial support of the church into the government. And that's, that's why you have a King James Bible, when James isn't the king, but that's who you should honor by reading that.
When you read the Coptic New Testaments of the Copts, it is beautiful. It is the teachings of Christ. There is absolutely no rules or oppression in there at all. I mean, it's like he is liberating the soul of people. Seek within yourself the truth. And that's what it is. And when you read a lot of English New Testament, they try to put pro-government and rules in there too. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to get it out of the Coptic organization.
Yeah, but it's in Coptic.
John Davis?
No, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the difference on the Geneva Bible and
The King James?
the King James and the Coptic?
Well, let me ask the first part.
The
Geneva Bible and the King James Bible are verbatim identical. The only difference is that the King James does not have the side page inscriptions that John Calvin put in there. They tell you that the King James took 60 guys 70 days or something to put together, and all it is verbatim, word for word, the Bible that predated it 51 years.
What's the difference between that?
Okay.
Yeah.
What makes the Coptic Bible so unique is that it's not verbatim like what you have Matthew, John, Luke, and all that. It really spreads the gospel. Now, the Copts were Egyptians that converted to Christianity, and their script is basically a Greek alphabet in the Egyptian language. Now, what they did is, like the old Egyptian religion had the same thing. They had rules and everything. You obey Ra or he'll punish you, and Osiris and all that. What happened is when the teaching of Christ spread into Egypt, the Copts wrote the story as they would understand it. Basically, the old figure of Ra became the Father, Osiris became Christ, and Mary, Virgin Mary, was the equivalent of Isis. They had to understand it, but when you read it, it is just a complete text of total liberation. The teachings are there. I mean, it's basically to liberate and to free the human soul and to seek out your individuality. No rules, nothing. It's actually very good, which like parallels some of the older Egyptian texts, but they added Christianity to it. It's completely different.
The Copts adopted Christianity just like that.
They
It's
adopted.
the same thing we've been doing with different names.
They adopted it very quickly.
Who has it? Did you have a question, ma'am? Oh, okay. Does anybody hasn't had one? Okay, let's go around again. Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch?
Yes, sir. People ask us about it all the time.
Fine. Enoch was the seventh son of Adam, and Noah was grandson of Enoch. Correct?
Perhaps.
That's where Noah got the information to build the ark and so on.
But the problem with the Keys of Enoch are this. The alleged manuscript appeared on the scene in the mid-1800s. It was concocted and written into English to concur with the English Bible again.
What was?
It was written, and it concurs with the English Bible, which already has some problems. Yes.
The Book of Knowledge was given to J.J. Urtak from the Academy of Future Science.
Right. There is, in other words, it's a faith thing. There is no original document anywhere in the world.
No,
it's a faith.
It came spiritually to him.
Yes,
But it's
but
faith.
It's a faith thing. It's if you believe that, it's a faith thing that doesn't have any actual document to prove it. Yes.
What about the Gospel of Thomas? That's
Gospel of Thomas is bogus. The only one of the Gospels that I believe that isn't that has validity to it is the Gospel of Barnabas. How are we getting all these Bible questions?
I don't know.
We're not even supposed to be Bible. Yes, ma'am.
What about Hermes? All these books are now coming out into English that were actually in a lot of the European languages of the Hermetica and all the different
Hermes Trismegistus. That's all. That's the god of alchemy.
Well, I understand that, but it's supposed to be very ancient writing, isn't it?
Well, you hear a lot about Hermes as a god, and what happened is in the Middle Ages, the alchemists related to that, and they created the whole science of Hermetics and alchemists around this Greek god that was created in the Middle Ages.
This gentleman hasn't asked a question. Yes.
Well, I did ask.
Oh,
but
okay, that's
we're
right.
going around again.
Sorry.
So anyway, I just want you guys to tell us about the alien manipulation and control through the ages. That's what I want to hear about.
Well,
What?
that's
a lecture in
We are
itself.
not UFO alien experts.
No.
They're behind everything.
Yeah.
The best thing to watch is I recommend you get the videotapes of Robert Morning's guy. He does I was very surprised because he is dead on linguistics. He shows you old Sumerian, Akkadian, and Egyptian glyphs, and it is something where you can take a Wallace Budge Egyptian dictionary
And you can look
look it up, and it's there. There's a lot of other people that are phonies where they have nothing to back it up. But Robert Morning's guy, you can look it up in dictionaries. It's there. He's on there.
I like his life.
Okay, you sir.
Yes, have you Alexander Hyslop's Two Babylons?
The book, The Two Babylons?
History, yes.
Yes. A lot of it's very good. A lot of it's very good. Let's get this gentleman here.
Is that this? Where the coin came from?
That coin's an enigma, and what happened was it was found here in North America, and after with all the other stuff, you'll notice that it's got Helios written on it. So we believe that this directly correlates to this tomb in North America. Now the reason we haven't mentioned anything about the tomb is because to us it's old hat. We've been doing it for 3 years. And we have so many videos available. We have over 200,000 words available that it is just pointless to try to get into something that is so deep and so thick. In 1, 2, 3, 4 hours, I can talk to you for weeks concerning it and answer those questions. But we just don't correlate that much. Yes, sir.
What makes you think that maybe something similar to a copy of the Library of Alexandria?
Because that's what the inscriptions indicate. We do know that when I first saw an entire host of the artifacts back in 1994, the world famous photographer Virginia Horrigan, I met her in St. Louis, meet me in St. Louis, and I took her back over to Mount Vernon, Illinois, and I got for the first time to look at her photo albums. And I set my camera up and I just started photographing this stuff. And what I realized when I was shooting it with my video camera is a big problem with people putting all this stuff together, trying to figure out who it was, is that there was obviously tablets in there that were 2,000 years old, 2,000 years ago. And they brought them over here. So there were select items from the Alexandrian Museum that they brought over with them. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, the coin you found is interesting. You found it 6 feet under. The deepest archaeological anomaly that I've heard of is finding a modern human skeleton 6 feet under bedrock.
In Tucson.
Yeah.
Landfill.
What is the deepest depth that you know of these abnormalities, and what is your personal hunch as to how old civilization really is?
I bet that lady with the white jacket can answer. Forbidden archaeology. They have found dolls 190 feet down. They have found not skulls, but like you say, though, that is the oldest human remains. Yeah. What he's talking about is some completely siliconized, fossilized human remains that were found under 11.5 feet of bedrock when they were building a landfill in Tucson, Arizona. It's written in William Corliss's books. And the problem was is they looked like modern man, and which completely devastates the theory of evolution. While we're on evolution, I personally know the guy that makes all the skulls that you see in all the magazines and the museums. They aren't fake. He makes them, and he's very good at it. Dr. Gene Friley in Columbus, Ohio. There are no skulls that depict any kind of evolution theory whatsoever. Yes, ma'am.
What's your hunch as to how old we might be of civilization?
Answer that.
Millions, tens of millions?
Endless.
We don't know.
We don't know.
That the bodies, they found 3 bodies in situ around with some azurite stuff, and the teeth were all, completely fossilized. They had 3 bodies that they estimate at 100 million years old. There's nothing that comes close to that.
I do believe, with a lot of history going on and all this, that there's clearly civilization long before our time, but it happens that about 6,000 BC, something drastic happened. Memories were erased. There's no history before that. What happened? And I think Robert Morningsky suggests that there was some kind of a conflict, possibly with aliens, that they wanted people to forget what happened before. And they were completely brainwashed, and that makes a lot of sense because.
Adding to that, in the Old Testament, the dove went out and he came back with a branch in his mouth. What was the branch? Olive. If you study your horticulture books, it takes 9 years for an olive tree to sprout a leaf. It takes 12 years to sprout a branch. It is the slowest growing tree extant in the earth. Yes, ma'am.
In your other lecture out there, you said something about somebody burrows.
Yes, ma'am.
Taking stuff up. Can you explain what's your problem? Who is this?
We have all that documented through our catalog and everything. Basically, what happened was a guy used some treasure books, treasure maps, and found this ancient tomb and just was stealing stuff out of it right and left. And he's threatened to kill us. He's threatened to kill me. He slanders me. He does all this stuff, and I'm just a nice guy.
Why does he hate you also?
Because we busted him. He stole about $7 million worth of gold. He stole big diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, etc., etc. And we are trying to put a stop to it.
How do you know he stole it? And how do you know it was there?
Because we have his ledger books with his handwriting talking about where he sold it and how much he had. That's
Receipts.
all documented.
And there wasn't any left in there at all?
No, there's plenty left in. No one man could steal 8 tons of gold.
So who owns all of it that's still in there?
Whoever it belongs to, state of Illinois, you, me, everybody in this room. It's our heritage. It's something that's happened in our country.
And how were you allowed to go in?
We don't go in yet. We just did our seismic and everything else that we did to the ground to locate a cave. But all that's documented. You know, you can stay up on, and also with our webpage, www.alexhelios.com, we keep updates on. It's a very large webpage. It's larger than any university, and it's all me and him.
We have.
How did you get the ledger book?
Because families that were connected, you see the magazine that's facing you, that man on the front, his family works with us. Okay,
And
there's somebody else coming up the way here. Yes, sir.
So you know where the cave is?
We know the general area, yes.
Is it privately owned?
Yes.
Yes.
It is.
What we have done is, first of all, the state of Illinois is absolutely not interested in it. They said we find it, they want nothing to do with it. Second, we have acquired this information. We have copyrighted all the information that we have thus got so far. So we own the information and the copyrights. Nobody can take that away from us. We don't care about the gold and all that much. We just, we're really concerned about the information that's in there, and we want to bring that out to the world. But we own the copyrights to all that information, the inscriptions. No scholars or anybody else can infringe on my decipherments or anything. We took care of that right from step one.
The history is documented.
The history where we come.
What makes you think that he would leave gold there?
Because there's just too, when you've got a stack of gold this much in your room, your back hurts. What are you going to do with more?
So you mean he's been stopped by now where he can't go back?
Yeah, he's getting elderly. He's been, all that gold, I need a wheelbarrow. Just get tired of lugging gold. You can only pick up a brick 50 pounds at the most at a time. It's hard to get a hold of. It's so small.
What do the private owners think?
That we're all bananas. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any information or opinion on the scroll or on the book, the Jesus Conspiracy, about that?
Jesus Conspiracy. I believe that is another one of those that I just thumbed through and said this is fiction and just did this. I wouldn't put any credit in it.
What do you think about the
The Shroud
Shroud of Turin?
of Turin, I don't believe that it is authentic. No.
I don't know.
There's nothing to indicate that you can have a piece of, it's a faith thing. That's all I can say. It's a faith thing. If you believe it and you have faith in it, it might as well be real. It's not going to change anything anyway, anyhow. Yes, did you have another question? You didn't?
I feel this way. This is one thing I want to add, like to the shroud. This is one thing I found very disgusting when I was in Catholic school, because I was indoctrinated Catholic. They treasure so much the little scrap bone off a dead saint, the little piece of wood off a cross, the Shroud of Turin and all that. It should not make a difference. It is the teachings of Christ that I care about. I like what he says. I could care less about shrouds or pieces. And there's no value in the relics, but his teachings are what is important to me.
Unless the energy from it heals you.
I think his teachings are good enough for that.
Yes,
I understand that there was a big, huge change in Constantinople in the year like 325 AD.
Yes, sir, it sure was.
Can you comment about that? So you can give us some about
The New Testament,
Well, concerning history,
the Bible.
concerning the big change in
the Council of Nicaea, well, what happened was the Rome was so corrupt, and the Catholic Church had such a big deal out of it. It was such a stronghold there. Constantine moved the capital of the Roman Empire basically to Constantinople, and with that they held their Council of Nicaea, I think in 306 AD, and then when they decided what books were going to be in the Bible and how they were going to do it, and this and that and this and that. Basically, that's what when they codified the Bible that we actually extrapolate from today.
Did they take out like past lives, something about past lives out of that?
Well, in a sense, the resurrection of Christ is a reincarnation of some description. And that's the fact that that's one of the teachings of the Bible is that lives that if you live and you live right, you come back in some form, and then however it's changed and tainted, just if you get a real good Greek lexicon, concordance, or whatnot, you can pretty much wheedle through it. But whenever there's a scripture in the Bible that you have a question with, get yourself a Greek dictionary and look it up. Just look it up. Yes, sir.
Have you run into any information regarding the Greek mythology?
5 more minutes.
The Greek mythology, such as genetic engineering that they were doing here with Ham, with the body of a goat,
Yes.
him, and also a mermaid the archaeologists found with a body of a human and a fish tail. It's been found by archaeologists. Have you found any connection?
Yes, when you read the ancient Sumerian texts, they talk about genetic engineering of the gods of different creatures. It's in Greek mythology, so I hold, there's always something to mythology. There's always some little truth to it, because nobody makes up things like that unless, they were told or something. But basically, it was in a Sumerian text, and this, well, I do have a little story to tell. You can ask a question after. I want to present the problems we've been having. We've had problems with both sides, but this is a field of top linguistic scholars of this day. 1995, we went to a conference in Columbus, Georgia, and there was a couple linguist scholars that were not there. Reason was, there was a linguistic conference in Athens, Greece in 1995. And I was like, boy, I missed something. Why didn't I go over there? Well, I didn't find out until a few months later what that conference was all about. They gathered 20 of the top Bible and Aramaic scholars, and they found a new Semitic word in a cuneiform text, the word sagara, which translates into the season spring. Spring, the season spring. Well, the word and the translation was not a problem at all. The problem was the scholars could not decide whether the word was feminine, masculine, or neuter.
So they had an entire conference over it.
That whole thing, the conference was an ending to a 30-year-long debate. They've been debating that since the 60s. The word spring, they could not decide whether it was feminine, masculine, or neuter. They voted on it 2 years ago and came up with a decision. What would you consider the word spring to be? Feminine, masculine, or neuter? Just thinking common sense.
Who cares?
Who cares?
Yeah, who cares? Tell them you'd be looking for a job if you did one word in 30 years.
I would be looking for a job if I was doing one word in 30 years. I mean, I just decipher and get the meaning. The word is spring. Who cares what tense it is? Well, they debated. Everything was stalled because they had to decide and vote on whether that word was feminine, masculine.
And there were still ticked off scholars.
I mean, for me, using common sense, well, spring is rebirth, the birth, you know, women give birth. That's feminine. Well, they agreed it was feminine, but it took them 30 years. That's the problems we have. This is why there's so little being done in linguistics, because of arguments like that.
Yes, ma'am. It's this new thing coming out that Mike has showed us. He has turned us on to a lot of information. We are new to the global science community. We had no idea what you guys would be like or anything. We just packed a bunch of stuff in a car and then head out. And we figured we can entertain somebody with a mobile museum regardless. And we really don't, when we go to a conference now, we don't decide what it is that we're going to talk about until we get to the parking lot and lock the doors. And so what they do is they take some kind of what they call a sacred geometry. Watch out for the word sacred. Everything's sacred now. Sacred pipes, sacred TV, sacred program, sacred this, sacred shoes, sacred ceremony, sacred sweat, sacred this, sacred pipe. Everything is sacred. Be careful with sacred geometry. Euclid, they've been doing geometry for 2,500 years, and a circle is not sacred. It's just a circle. Yeah. Okay. I missed it by 500. It's a thing that it's hard to explain, but they get this thing and then they turn it and twist it and then they make all these letters in the English alphabet.
It isn't a start that we missed.
Oh, excuse me.
But it makes the Hebrew block script alphabet, which he claims that is how Thoth gave mankind writing. The problem is Thoth did not give the Hebrew block script. He gave the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and there's no record of it coming from a tetrahedron.
What, you got a question?
I was showing Paul last night the power of the circle.
Yeah.
We got two.
Yes, ma'am.
Since you all are linguists, maybe you can help me with this, because I've always been interested in Atlantis versus Egypt. That Atlantis sank, and then some people came over about 12,000 years ago and started
Very possible.
the great flourishing of Egypt.
Yes, ma'am.
My maiden name is Thoth, you know, and
Good.
Hungarian is what it is. The
Nice.
Hungarian language is unlike any other in the world.
Yes.
I'm wondering if there's a connection. Do you have any idea?
Well, there is we can't really pinpoint them, but we do see a lot of connections when you're talking about Indo-European languages. They give like the Indus Valley, the root and everything spread there. Another thing I have is, okay, it goes that far back, but when you go back to old Vedic stories of India, where did the Aryans come from? Well, they came from the north. And you have the Germanics that come from the north and all that. So I've even come to the point...
if Atlanteans ended up in the mountainous area, because apparently these Thoths... I've even speculated, you know, that possibly the Caucasians came from the inner earth, because everything points to the north. The old Nordic legends say that their ancestors came from the North Pole area. A lot of people talk about that, and there's migration from the north. I don't know. That's one piece of speculation I have, but I cannot verify it yet.
There are also Indo-Sumer
In the Atlantic?
in Hungary. I have found.
Oh.
Yeah. You got a question?
Bahamas.
Came in and mixed in his language.
Which one?
Well, there was whatever the people were speaking, whatever language they were speaking before Attila the Hun came.
Right.
Attila the Hun came, and naturally language had to be mixed in there.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
From the
Exactly,
Orient.
exactly.
I'm wondering if there was an Atlantean language that these Thoths were speaking, that they had
that
to
is
be
very-
refugees.
Some of them had the same characters on them. They had the same style. They had the same circular objects in them. They had the same coloring. They had the same, I've got several of them in here, but it's too lengthy here to go through them. But all of these countries that are this big, that obviously had no printing press. They hardly had anybody that even knew how to speak their own language. They printed up the money, and it all comes about on the scene at the same time. Money in North America was backed by coinage, mostly, up to this point. But around about 1820, 1830 or so, just about every country in the world, all of a sudden, has coinage. The same denomination, in many cases the same guy's head. In the British Empire, all these countries had their own coinage with the King George III on them, and they all came about at the same time. With the same denomination, a quarter was exactly the same size, the pennies were exactly the same size, the deca coins or the dime, what we would represent 10 of something, were all the same size, the nickels were the same size, the gold coins were all the same size. So it's obvious, it became obvious to me that whoever was doing it, it was the same person printing up all of it. It was the same person stamping out the coinage. It was the same persons that were printing all of the bills that were spread out all over the world, and it all happened just like that. Well, around about the 1800s, we get a new thing going. It's called postage. And oh, isn't that great? We had the Pony Express, then we had the Postal Service, which now is just we buy little bitty pieces of paper with some print on them that is a coupon for 32 cents. We lick, oh, you don't even have to lick them anymore. Now they put the stick on it for you. You're getting your money's worth. You stick it on a letter, you drop it in the mail, and it goes somewhere. Well, I collect stamps too, not because I think it is a financial gain or it's going to make me. I just collect this stuff to learn from it. And I collected world stamps for a long time, and I had a series of stamps, big, thick, old books that was passed down to me from my grandfather, a couple of my uncles, my father, that said, oh, well, here we got a sucker that's going to spend all this time with all these stamps. Let's just give it all him. If you got anybody in your family that collects stamps, if they even think that you're slightly interested, they'll just give you everything. So I had all these stamps and all these boxes, and I went and started going through the big albums that I had that were very old also, and putting everything in them. And I noticed some very strange things. Stamps were the same way. All of a sudden, they all appeared on the scene just like that. They had the same styles, the same denominations, many of them the same heads. There was an Argentinian stamp back in the early 1930s that had Roosevelt's head on it. Now, why in the world would the Argentinians have a Roosevelt head on their stamp? There were triangle stamps, there were octagonal stamps, and they had for different countries. They're all written the same way. Some
school or college. But I'm going to take a safety precaution first, which is also going to be fun for all of you. I haven't been informed by some people that there's some dark forces of somebody that does not like what I'm saying. So to be safe, I suspect that it's possibly some dark alien forces that are after us or something, or do not like what they're doing. So if there are any of you in here, it's time to go. Because I have an ancient Egyptian cleansing ritual that whatever they try to do to us or this room while we're speaking, it's going right back to them.
And it's true.
It's an ancient Egyptian ritual that sends it, that whatever they're trying to do, it will go back to them. Any negative energy is going to be reversed and we're going to be free. I would like you to repeat after me each line. And when I raise my hand on the last line, look up to the sky, and that should do it. Awa ubena emnen.
Awa ubena emnen.
Keferukua.
Keferukua.
Em keferu en keferem.
Keferu en keferem.
Keferem septepi.
Keferem septepi.
Shetu.
Shetu.
Satutka en Herak.
Satutka en Herak.
Thank you. We're safe now. Now we can begin.
That was an ancient Egyptian prayer that cleansed them of Shetu. Grays, yeah. It's probably about 5,000 or 6,000 years old.
I had to look it up before this lecture to get it in.
Okay.
We may now begin.
I'll see you.
I'm going to shut the back door.
Okay, a while back when I started this, I was collecting ancient coins, and we got into commercial artifacts because many companies that deal in ancient coins, they feature other articles of antiquity. And I was going to write a book called Who Stole the Lamp? Now, if you're a coin collector, you have to travel to different places and to see the coins that you want to see. If there's a certain particular coin that you want to buy, you try to track it down and you try to get a good deal on it. And you see a bunch of other stuff too. And you meet people from Assyria, people from Iraq, people from Iran, people from Egypt, people from Greece, people from Kentucky, people from Indiana, people from New York City, all over the states that are at major coin shows around the United States that have their artifacts, that have their coins for sale. And the first portion of this presentation is going to be Who Stole the Lamp? Now, in many modern contemporary artifacts, what they suppose artifacts is genuine, authentic, artifacts of sorts, they feature these little oil lamps. They used to be $20, then they got up to $35, then they're $45, now they're $50, $60, $100, now they're $200. Every company features them in all their catalogs all the time. There's just endless. And I have examined literally hundreds of these. None of them have any oil residue. None of them have any carbon burn marks on them. But everybody swears that they are all authentic. So the name of my book, which is the first part of this, Who Stole the Lamp? So the only way that, as Paul and I do our research, things have to make sense. We can't just pull something out of the air and say, okay, this is what this means, or this is how this happened. There has to be a logical, definitive reason for why things happen in the sequential order that they do. And after examining literally hundreds, thousands of these, because let alone all of these warehouses like the Sadi Gallery out of New York City, who sell these things, and so many others, Amphora, the Helios Group, the Cleaton Group, the Tomlinson, all these coin companies that are now selling these ancient lamps, supposed ancient lamps. Who stole the lamp? The only conclusion that I could come to is that somebody, 2,000, 2,500 years ago, went through a town and snuck in everybody's house, stole their lamp, because all of them are in perfect condition, stole their lamp, and then went to Judea, Palestine, Israel, and dug a hole and put them all in there and gently packed them all into this one hole, because they find them, large quantities in certain holes, and they dig them up, and they sell them to Americans. You can call up this company here, and you can order 25 of this style. You can order 30 of this style. They have so many styles, and they each have their own little name. Each of them, they know exactly what city they come from, what year they were made, and what era that was from. Go ahead, ma'am. And it's like I say, none of them have any carbon residue. None of them have any oil in them, and they don't show anything. And these are two that just came out last week, and I wanted to bring them to show you that they are the most recent. And now they're making them real fancy. Some of them you can double as a pipe. Some of them you can do this, and they're $100, $225, $150, $150, $250, $125, $100, $100, $100. So there's big money in this. 100, extra fine condition. None of them are broken. I have been to these artifact shows, and the people that I have seen what they call Roman makeup bottles, that the glass is thinner than a light bulb. And it's got mud caked up all around it. And they'll have 20, 30, 40 of them up here. Well, how in the world is somebody going, what are the chances of somebody finding these really fine makeup, and they got the mascara stick to go with it. Oh, this is what they did, was they put mascara in there, but they said it was tar. Can you imagine, ladies, having tar on your eyes when you cried or something and you sweat and you having tar come down your face? So, and you put they just happen to have the little curve in the mascara liner, and you stick it down in there, it fits just perfect. And the glass is super thin, it's paper thin, but they'll have mud caked up all around it to make it look like it's old, like somebody dug it up. And some of them are very finely painted around the edges, and it's obviously that it's blown glass. And so who stole the lamp? And now we're going to get to who stole the lamp. I collect currencies. Now we're going to leave ancient coins for just that and the lamps. I collect currencies. And in this book, there's more currencies than there are in the Smithsonian. When I was in the Smithsonian, I'd heard, oh, how great and wonderful the Smithsonian was, and how it's got all these buildings, and oh, you can just get lost in there for days. I saw everything I wanted to see in the Smithsonian in less than 2.5 hours. They didn't have really a whole lot of anything. I had more maps than they had, better maps, better condition. We had a lot more currencies than they had. And it's a couple of very funny things with the currency. We'll notice that the first currencies in the United States were actually the southern banks of the Confederacy. They supported, you had a bank, and the bank would set up its money with what its wealth was of the community. And they tried different schemes. They would print different monies. And a bank is fine as long as everyone in the community honors that particular denomination of monetary exchange. There's absolutely no problem whatsoever. It was fine. The farmers were happy. The traders were happy. The business people were happy. Everyone was happy. The first actual United States or United Colony currency, what you see is this type of this. It looks like this. They're all backed by the Spanish shilling. And the reason for that is because the United States was supposedly attempting to get away from the financial burden of England. So they shifted the money from an England backing, or the British note, the British pound, into something that was backed by Spanish shilling. I'm sure that made everybody feel very wonderful. And as time grows on, as the 1800s come about, the southern banks are doing fine during the Confederacy, but the Union's got it, the federal banks have got to catch up. So they come up with the first dollar bill in 1862 during the height of the uncivil war. War is not a civil thing. It's either glorious or not. You either win or lose. But they started printing money, federal money. And funny thing, about the same time that federal bills started coming out, currency all over the world came about on the scene, just that fast. The same denominations. Some were the same country, the same color, and out of all this, oh, wait a second now, what are the chances of this happening in the real world? What's behind all this? And with the stamps, I noticed in doing it that there were some very small countries that had a series of 50 or 60 stamps. And they had page after page in these books. And you go and you look for these countries. I'd never heard of them. And countries have changed names in this century 10 or 15 times. And there was some small Tibetan emirates. There was a tiny Tibetan emirate that was way up in the Himalayas that had 100% illiteracy. It was kind of like between the border of Mongolia, China / Russia. And they had absolutely no literacy. They had a language that they could speak, which was some off-the-wall dialect of Russian twisted into Chinese and whatnot. And I had a series of 30 stamps from this country, and everybody's illiterate. Well, who's writing letters to who? Who's paying bills? Is there a power company there? Was there a railroad? Was there postage? Yes, there was. But nobody could write letters. And you know, it was obvious that all of these stamps, when you examined them, they all had exactly the same dimensions. I mean, I got down with a microscope and measured them all. And series, let's say that you have a certain series of stamps from the United States in 1935, just to give you as a hypothetical situation that I came across. You'd have a stamp that would be put and printed a certain color, a certain denomination with a certain number of little ridges on the stamps. Now, that's really important on stamps when you're a stamp collector. It's got to have exactly the right number of little squiggles on it. So when you tear it, you know, those little things that hold it together, perforations. When you tear it, and they give you all these gauges to measure it by, all of them were identical. The world over. Come to find out, they were all printed in Philadelphia. Every doggone one of them. All the countries except for England, with all their stamps were printed in Philadelphia. Well, I got to thinking and said, well, let's look at this a little closer. And sure enough, all of the money, except for England and Germany, was printed in Philadelphia. Germany, because they were the ones making the presses for us to print our money. All of them came from the same place. This Saddam Hussein note was one of the most popular bills in Iraq during the Iraqi War, the Gulf War. While the Gulf War was going on, and we were feeding the flocks with cannon fodder, this bill was being stamped in Philadelphia right next door to where your monies was being stamped at. Right next door to it. Was there a disruption in the flow of cash? No. Did they tell you about it? No. Did you read about it in National Enquirer? No. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that all the money is printed.